There is something deeply comforting about the town of Springfield. You have probably known it your whole life, that sun-faded yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, the cracked sidewalk leading up to a front door that never quite closes all the way, the blue couch in the living room that has absorbed 30 years of laughter and confusion, and the particular kind of love that doesn't always know how to say its own name out loud. You know the family that lives there. You know their voices. You know the way the father laughs, that rolling, helpless laugh that starts somewhere deep in his chest and spills out of him before he even has time to decide whether the thing is actually funny. You know the way the mother hums while she stirs something on the stove, the way her voice carries just enough warmth to make any room feel smaller and safer than it actually is. You know the children, the boy with the skateboard, the girl with the book, the baby, always watching, always knowing more than anyone gives her credit for. Springfield is one of the most familiar places that has never existed. And that familiarity, that deep, almost genetic recognition, is exactly what makes the theories so unsettling when you first encounter them. Because someone, somewhere, looked at this warm and familiar world and started asking questions that the show never intended you to ask. They looked at the timeline and noticed it didn't add up. They looked at the water and wondered what was really in it. They looked at the nuclear plant on the edge of town and thought about what 30 years of low-level radiation does to a population. They looked at Homer Simpson slumped on that blue couch, eyes glazed, and they asked, what if he isn't really here at all? Tonight, we are going to explore those questions together. We are going to move through 10 theories about The Simpsons, and we are going to rank them by how dangerous they are, not in terms of being offensive, not in terms of breaking the rules of the show, but in terms of how much they threaten the comfortable, golden warmth of the world we think we know. A danger level of 1 means the theory is a gentle curiosity, a small wrinkle in the fabric, something you can tuck away and forget by morning. A danger level of 10 means the theory, if you really follow it all the way to its conclusion, changes everything. It reaches back through the whole series and rewrites what you were watching all along. We will begin gently. We will ease into it slowly, the way you ease into warm water on a cold night, 1 degree at a time, so gradually that you barely notice the temperature changing until you are already in it completely. Get comfortable. Let your breathing slow down. There is nowhere else you need to be tonight, and nothing else you need to do. The stories will come to you softly, one after another, and by the time we reach the end, you will have traveled somewhere very strange and very beautiful, and the town of Springfield will look just a little different than it did before. Let's begin. Section 1. Danger Level 1 out of 10. The floating timeline glitch. Let's start with something light. Something that lives at the very surface of the show, something you can observe from a comfortable distance without having to venture anywhere too unsettling. This first theory isn't really a theory in the dramatic, conspiratorial sense. It's more of an observation, a careful, patient observation made by the kind of viewer who watches the same episodes over and over across many years, who keeps mental notes, who starts to notice after a while that certain things about the world of Springfield don't quite line up the way they should. The observation is this: Springfield does not age. Now, that sounds like it should be obvious. You knew that already. Everyone who watches the show knows that Homer is always 39, that Bart is always 10, that Lisa is always 8, that Maggie is always a baby who has been on the verge of walking for 3 decades without ever quite taking that first step. The Simpsons is an animated comedy, and animated comedies don't age their characters. That's just how they work. That's part of the unspoken agreement between the show and its audience. You accept it, and in exchange, the show gives you the pleasure of returning to the same family in the same house year after year, finding everything just as you left it. But here is where the observation becomes interesting, and here is where a certain kind of viewer starts to ask a slightly different question. The question is not, why don't the characters age? The question is, what does it mean that the show refuses to let time pass, and what happens to the story when you take that refusal seriously? Because here is the thing. The Simpsons has never pretended that time doesn't exist. The show is not set in some eternal, timeless void where events happen without consequence. Episodes reference specific years. Characters celebrate specific birthdays. There are flashback episodes that show us the past Homer and Marge in high school, Homer's parents in their younger years, Grandpa Simpson in the war. There are flash-forward episodes that show us the future Bart as a failed adult, Lisa as a successful one, Springfield in some vague and speculative tomorrow. The show has always been deeply interested in time, in history, in the idea that people have pasts and that those pasts shaped them. And yet the characters don't move through that time. They hover in it, suspended. The theory, and it's a gentle theory, a fondly curious one, is that the timeline of The Simpsons is not broken by accident. It isn't the result of lazy writing or convenient forgetfulness. It is, according to certain devoted fans, a deliberate structural choice that reflects something true about the nature of the show itself. The floating timeline, they argue, is The Simpsons acknowledging in its own quiet way that it exists outside of ordinary time, that Springfield is a kind of eternal present, a place where the same moments keep happening because that is what Springfield is for. Springfield is not a place you grow through. Springfield is a place you return to. Think about what it means to return to something rather than move through it. When you move through something, a phase of life, a relationship, a period of years, you carry it with you afterward, it changes you. You look back at who you were and you can measure the distance between that person and the one you are now. There is a before and an after, and the transition between them cost you something, even if what you received in return was worth the price. Moving through things is how you become a person over time. It is how you accumulate yourself. But returning to something is different. When you return to a place or a feeling or a story, you aren't measuring distance, you are erasing it. You are stepping back across whatever ground you covered and finding yourself, however briefly, exactly where you were before. The return doesn't change you, it restores you. It gives back something that the forward movement of time took away, and it does so without demanding anything in exchange. Springfield is a place of return. That is what the floating timeline theory suggests, at its most generous and its most poetic. The show does not age its characters because aging would mean forward movement, and forward movement would mean loss, and The Simpsons has never been a show about loss. It has been a show about the endless, renewable capacity of a family to absorb chaos and come back together. Homer does something catastrophic, and by the end of the episode, the catastrophe is absorbed. Bart breaks something irreparable, and by next week, the irreparable thing is whole again. The town burns, the marriage cracks, the friendships fracture, and then the next episode begins, and everything is exactly as it was, as if the fractures never happened. This is not, the theorists argue, a failure of continuity. It is a statement of faith. The show believes at some structural, almost theological level that the family endures, that the love is real and renewable, that no matter what happens in any given episode, The Simpsons will still be The Simpsons when the next one begins. And the floating timeline is how the show enforces that belief. Now, there is a slightly darker version of this theory, and we should spend a moment with it before we move on, because it is where the danger level, even for a gentle theory, starts to show its edges. The slightly darker version says that the floating timeline isn't just a statement of faith, it is a kind of trap. Because if time doesn't pass, then growth doesn't happen. Homer can learn the same lessons over and over without them ever sticking, because in a world without time, there is no mechanism for lessons to accumulate into wisdom. Bart can be redeemed, and then return to being exactly the character who needed redeeming. Lisa can make progress and then find that her progress has been quietly reversed. And the characters, in this reading, are not comfortably suspended in a warm, eternal present. They are stuck. They are caught in a loop they cannot exit, repeating the same emotional beats because the world won't let them do otherwise, because the world was designed to prevent them from ever truly changing. It's a little like a certain kind of dream, the kind where you keep trying to get somewhere and the destination keeps receding, where you walk and the scenery changes, but your position somehow doesn't, where effort doesn't translate into progress. A dream that isn't quite a nightmare, but that has the texture of frustration underneath its ordinary surface. But we are starting gently tonight, and we will not linger in that darker reading. The floating timeline, at danger level 1, is mostly a warm observation, a fond curiosity. It is the first sign that Springfield is not quite an ordinary place, that it operates by slightly different rules than the world outside it. But it is the gentlest possible introduction to that idea. Notice it. Hold it lightly. Let it sit in the back of your mind as we continue. Because all the theories that follow will build on what this one establishes. That Springfield is a world with its own logic. its own relationship to time and consequence, its own way of deciding what is real and what isn't. And once you start to see that, you start to wonder whether the strangeness of Springfield is accidental or whether it was always pointing at something. We'll get to that. For now, let it rest. Before we move to the next theory, if you're watching this late at night, or early in the morning, or somewhere in between, drop a comment and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is where you're watching. There's something I genuinely love about knowing that someone in one city is drifting off at 2 in the morning, while someone in another country is having this as their quiet background on a Sunday afternoon. Leave your location and time in the comments, and while you're there, consider subscribing. These long, slow explorations take time to make, and it means everything when someone decides to stay. Section 2. Danger Level 2 out of 10. The Treehouse of Horror Bleed Theory. Every year, usually around Halloween, the Simpsons would do something a little unusual. They would step outside the normal rules of the show, the rules that say nothing permanently changes, that the characters survive whatever happens to them, that Springfield exists in a warm and basically safe universe, and they would tell horror stories. The Treehouse of Horror episodes were the show's annual permission slip to be something it normally wasn't. Genuinely strange, genuinely dark, genuinely willing to kill its characters and destroy its world, and explore ideas that the regular episodes never touched. In the Treehouse episodes, Homer gets eaten. Bart gets his head switched with a fly. The family is abducted by aliens who turn out to be running for president. Springfield is invaded. The universe is recreated. People die in slow motion and fast motion, and comedic motion and genuinely unsettling motion. The rules are suspended, and the show seems to breathe a little differently in that suspended space, looser, wilder, more willing to go somewhere uncomfortable. And the agreement, the unspoken, structural agreement between the show and its viewers, was always that none of that counts. The Treehouse episodes happen outside the main continuity. They are stories within stories, framed as tales told on Halloween night, and when the next regular episode begins, everything is back to normal, and the horrors have been neatly packed away until next October. That is the agreement. That is what everyone understood. The Treehouse of Horror Bleed theory says the agreement was never really kept. It starts with a simple observation, the kind of observation that seems almost too small to matter until you follow it to its conclusion. The observation is this: certain images, certain character behaviors, certain background details from the Treehouse episodes have a habit of showing up in regular episodes. Not as callbacks, not as deliberate references, but quietly, incidentally, as if the horror had leaked out of its container and seeped into the ordinary world without anyone quite noticing. The shadows in certain episodes are wrong, not dramatically wrong, not in a way that jumps out at you on first viewing, but wrong in the specific way that the shadows in the Treehouse segments are wrong, slightly longer and slightly colder than they should be, falling at angles that don't match the light source. Background characters in regular episodes occasionally appear in positions or poses that echo the body language of the monsters and demons from the Halloween specials. Certain episodes that deal with Homer's rage or Bart's cruelty have an edge to them that feels borrowed from the horror segments, a quality of menace that doesn't quite fit the warm comedy universe the show normally inhabits. The theorists who developed this idea spent a considerable amount of time cataloging these moments, building lists, cross-referencing episodes, mapping the specific visual language of the Treehouse specials against the regular seasons to find places where the two vocabularies overlapped. And what they found, they argue, suggests something about the relationship between the horror episodes and the main series that the show never officially acknowledged. Their argument is that the Treehouse segments and the regular episodes are not as separate as the framing device implies. They share a world. They breathe the same air. The horror that gets released in the Treehouse format doesn't disappear when October ends, it goes somewhere. It settles into the background of the regular show, not as a dramatic presence, not as something that changes the plot or terrifies the characters, but as an atmosphere, a temperature, a quality of light. And if that's true, then what does it mean about Springfield? What does it mean that the town where this normal, warm, familiar family lives is also quietly, in the corners, in the shadows, the town where those horror stories happen? What does it mean that the same streets, the same houses, the same bars and schools and nuclear plants that exist in the comedy also exist in the horror, and that the show moves between those two versions of itself without ever quite cleaning up the mess that one leaves in the other? There is a word for a place that exists simultaneously in two registers like that is ordinary on its surface and extraordinary or terrible in its depths. The word is liminal. It describes places that are thresholds, transitions, spaces between states. A hospital at 3 in the morning, a highway rest stop in the middle of the night. A town you pass through on a long drive that looks perfectly normal and yet leaves you slightly unsettled for reasons you can't quite name. Springfield, the bleed theory suggests, is a liminal space. The comedy and the horror are both true at the same time. The family is both warm and endangered. The town is both familiar and threatening. And the reason the Treehouse episodes feel like such a release, like a pressure valve being opened, is because the pressure they release is always there in the regular series, always present, always pushing against the walls of the warm comedy container, always looking for a crack. Let me tell you what makes this theory interesting beyond the visual catalog. Because the visual catalog is compelling, but it isn't the heart of the argument. The heart of the argument is about what comedy is for. There is a theory in literary criticism, an old one that dates back at least to Aristotle and has been refined and complicated by centuries of thinkers since that comedy and tragedy are not opposites. They are related forms that describe the same human experiences from different angles. Comedy shows the world correcting itself, the chaos resolving, the confusion clearing, the characters finding their way back to order and warmth. Tragedy shows the world failing to correct itself, the chaos deepening, the confusion compounding, the characters unable to find their way back. The same story can be comedy or tragedy depending on where you stop it. If you stop the story of Homer Simpson at the end of any given episode, the moment of reconciliation, the moment of forgiveness, the moment when the family comes back together on the couch, it is a comedy. The world corrected itself. The chaos resolved. Everything is fine. But if you don't stop it there, if you keep running past the moment of resolution and ask what happens next, what happens the week after, what happens when the lesson fades and the same mistakes begin to gather themselves again, then the comedy starts to develop a different texture. Because the mistakes do return. They always return. Homer will be careless again. Bart will act out again. The family will be tested again in the same ways it was tested before, and the same resolution will be required, and the whole cycle will begin once more. And the Treehouse episodes, the bleed theory argues, are the show's way of acknowledging what happens when you don't stop at the moment of resolution. They are the comedy's shadow, the story as it would unfold if the correcting mechanism failed, if the chaos didn't resolve, if the warmth didn't hold. The bleed is the shadow leaking back. At danger level 2, this is still a relatively gentle theory. It doesn't change the meaning of the show's events. It doesn't rewrite what happened. It just asks you to notice that the show has a shadow, that the shadow is always present, and that the line between the comedy and the horror is slightly more permeable than the framing device suggested. It's a theory about atmosphere, about the quality of a place, about what it means to live in a town that produces horror stories about itself every year, without anyone in the town ever seeming to register the implications. Springfield produces its own horror. It always has. And the people who live there just keep living, which is either the most comforting thing in the world or the most unsettling, depending on what kind of night you're having. We'll go a little deeper now. Take a breath. Settle in. The next theory is where the personal starts to enter the picture, where the strangeness stops being about the town and starts being about one specific man, a man you know very well, a man who has been the center of this universe for as long as the universe has existed. Section 3. Danger level 3 out of 10. Homer's brain damage arc. Here is something the show tells you directly, with no ambiguity, in the 5th season. Homer Simpson has a crayon lodged in his brain. The episode is called HOMR, and it is, in the estimation of many fans and critics, one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever produced. The setup is almost comedic in its casualness. Homer, as a child, was in the habit of shoving crayons up his nose. One day, one of them went too far. It lodged itself in the frontal lobe of his brain and stayed there, undetected, for decades, and in doing so, it dramatically and permanently reduced his intelligence. When the adult Homer discovers this, has the crayon surgically removed, and experiences what it feels like to be actually intelligent, the episode becomes something that the comedy container can barely hold. Homer, suddenly brilliant, can see his life clearly for the first time. He can see how he has failed his children, how his limitations have cost his family, how the fog he has lived inside for his entire adult life was not a natural condition but an artificial one, imposed on him by a childhood accident that nobody caught and nobody fixed. And then, because the intelligence makes him miserable because being smart in Springfield is a particular kind of loneliness, because Lisa is lonely, and now Homer finally understands exactly why he chooses to have the crayon put back. He chooses to return to the fog. He says goodbye to the version of himself that could see clearly, and he goes back to the one who can't. Now, this is a beautiful and heartbreaking episode on its own terms, but the theory that has developed around it is asking a different question than the one the episode was asking. The episode asks, what would Homer be like if he were smart? The theory asks, what if Homer's brain damage is not just the premise of one episode, but the key to understanding everything about him across the entire series? What if Homer's behavior across all 30-plus seasons is consistent with the behavior of a person with significant frontal lobe impairment, and the show has been depicting that with more accuracy and more pathos than it ever got credit for? This is where the theory gets interesting, because when you look at what frontal lobe damage actually does to a person, not in the cartoonish, comedic sense, but in the clinical, neurological sense, the list of symptoms maps onto Homer's character almost exactly: impaired impulse control. Homer acts before he thinks, constantly and consistently, in ways that cannot be explained by simple laziness or selfishness. He reaches for the thing he wants before he has any chance to assess whether reaching for it is wise. He commits to courses of action without any apparent ability to model their consequences. He is not choosing to be impulsive. He is constitutionally unable to stop himself from being impulsive, because the mechanism that would allow him to pause and consider has been damaged. Emotional dysregulation. Homer's emotional responses are frequently disproportionate. He experiences small frustrations as enormous provocations. He swings rapidly between extremes. He has difficulty modulating his reactions to match the actual scale of the situation. This, too, is consistent with frontal lobe impairment, which affects the brain's ability to regulate emotional responses and keep them calibrated to reality. Poor working memory. Homer forgets things constantly, not just incidentally, in the way that everyone forgets things, but structurally he forgets lessons he has learned, forgets the implications of previous experiences, forgets the context that should inform his current behavior. Each episode, he approaches similar situations with fresh incomprehension, as if the previous times left no trace. The floating timeline theory we explored in Section 1 has a neurological explanation in this reading. Homer doesn't accumulate experience because his brain is impaired in the specific way that prevents accumulation. Difficulty with abstract reasoning. Homer struggles with hypotheticals, with long-term planning, with cause and effect reasoning that extends more than a few steps into the future. He can respond to what is immediately in front of him, but projecting forward, imagining the consequences of his current actions in a week, a month, a year is genuinely difficult for him in a way that goes beyond ordinary short-sightedness. Social disinhibition. Homer says things he shouldn't say. He does things he shouldn't do in social situations. He violates unspoken rules in ways that embarrass his family because the mechanism that catches those violations before they happen is, in him, unreliable. Now, here is where the theory gains its emotional weight. Because if Homer's behavior across the series is the behavior of a person with frontal lobe damage, then the comedy of The Simpsons has been doing something remarkable that it never quite acknowledged. It has been showing us a man who is genuinely neurologically compromised, who is doing the best he can with a brain that has been impaired since childhood, who loves his family with enormous sincerity and cannot consistently act on that love because the part of him that would translate love into reliable, considered, respectful action has been damaged. Homer is not, in this reading, a bad person who keeps making selfish choices. He is a person who was injured as a child and was never treated, who grew up in a world that laughed at his limitations rather than recognizing them as symptoms, who built a life that is genuinely impressive given what he is working with: a wife who loves him, children who mostly love him, a job, a house, a community of friends. And who does that? with a brain that is working significantly harder than it should have to in order to produce results that a healthy person would find effortless. The comedy of Homer Simpson in this light is not just slapstick and stupidity. It is the comedy of someone trying. Someone trying very hard, in a body and a mind that make trying very hard, against obstacles that most people in the audience don't have. And when he fails, when the impulsiveness wins, when the emotional dysregulation takes over, when the lesson that seemed learned turns out to not have stuck, the failure is not the failure of a man who didn't care enough to do better. It is the failure of a brain that simply cannot do what the situation requires. This changes how the show feels, if you take it seriously. There is a scene that fans of this theory often point to, not a specific single scene, but a category of scene that recurs throughout the series. It is the scene where Homer, in a quiet moment, looks at his children with an expression of such pure, unguarded love that the comedy stops for a moment and something else comes through. The expression doesn't last. The next moment, he has already said something foolish or done something wrong or missed the significance of what was right in front of him. But the expression was real. The love was real. And the gap between that love and his ability to act on it is not a character flaw in the ordinary sense. It is a wound. He has had a crayon in his brain since childhood. He has been living with a wound he didn't know he had. And the show, across all its seasons, has been quietly, without ever quite saying so, the story of what a life looks like when it is built around a wound like that. At Danger Level 3, this theory is starting to complicate the comedy in ways that can't quite be uncomplication. You can't quite watch Homer's worst moments the same way after you've considered this idea. The laugh still comes, the show is still funny, the timing is still perfect, the situation comedy is still working, but there is something sitting underneath the laugh now. Something that wasn't there before. That something is the awareness that the man you are laughing at may be doing the best he can. And in the context of this theory, that awareness makes the show, at its best moments, almost unbearably moving. Let's go a little deeper still. Because the next theory doesn't stay with Homer, it moves to the man who employs him. And the man who employs him is, in almost every way, the opposite of Homer. Deliberate where Homer is impulsive, controlled where Homer is unregulated, coldly rational where Homer is helplessly emotional. The man who employs Homer is Charles Montgomery Burns. And what the next theory suggests about Mr. Burns is considerably more unsettling than anything we've discussed so far. Section 4, Danger Level 4 out of 10. The Burns Medical Conspiracy. Mr. Burns is 104 years old. The show is not entirely consistent about this. His age fluctuates across episodes, as ages in Springfield tend to do, but the general consensus, the number that comes up most often and that the character's backstory seems to support, is something in the triple digits. He was alive during both World Wars. He has clear memories of the 19th century. He has outlasted everyone he knew in his youth by so many decades that the concept of his own mortality has become almost abstract to him, a theoretical proposition he acknowledges intellectually without quite being able to feel. He should not be alive. By any reasonable biological accounting, Charles Montgomery Burns should have died a very long time ago. He is a skeleton with ambitions. He is so frail that a single bee landing on him once caused him to fall over. His immune system has been compromised by a lifetime of exposure to nuclear radiation, and yet the radiation has also, apparently, preserved something in him, some essential, animating darkness that refuses to release him from the world. The theory about Mr. Burns is not, at its core, about his age. His age is just the beginning, the first observation that leads to the larger question. The question is this: what if Burns is not simply old, but is actively, deliberately maintaining his longevity through means that are only slightly less sinister than they sound? The evidence starts with the show's own depictions of Burns's medical situation. We see his private medical facility, the one staffed by doctors who have dedicated their lives to keeping one very old, very wealthy, very demanding man alive. We see the procedures he undergoes, the treatments he receives, the lengths to which an enormous fortune is applied to the project of his continued existence. The show plays these scenes mostly for comedy. The contrast between Burns's ghoulish vitality and his physical decrepitude is a reliable source of humor. But the comedy obscures something that the theorists want you to look at more carefully. Look at what those doctors are doing. Look at what they're using. The theory proposes that Burns's medical program is not limited to conventional treatments. That somewhere in the vast infrastructure of his personal healthcare, the specialists, the experimental procedures, the resources that only someone of his wealth could access, there are interventions that border on exploitation. Specifically, the theory suggests that Burns has access to, and uses, biological materials derived from other people. Younger people, healthier people, people who may or may not have fully understood what they were agreeing to when they signed whatever documents Burns's lawyers put in front of them. This sounds, stated plainly, extremely dark. And it is. But the show, the theorists argue, has been gesturing at this idea for years. There are the episodes where Burns shows an unusual interest in specific employees, not in their work performance, not in their contributions to the plant's output, but in their physical health. He notices who is robust. He notices who has a particular quality of vitality. He files this information somewhere, mentally or literally, and it resurfaces later in ways that never quite pay off as explicit plot points, but that consistently suggest Burns is evaluating the people around him as potential resources. There is the famous episode in which Burns needs a blood transfusion, and Homer turns out to be the only matching donor in Springfield, a fact that Burns treats as the most valuable discovery he has made in years, and that he uses as leverage for the remainder of the episode. The comedy of the episode is about the power dynamic between the two men, but the underlying premise that Burns evaluates people's biological value and incorporates that value into his calculations is played completely straight. Burns does not see Homer's rare blood type as a lucky coincidence. He sees it as an asset he now owns. There are the recurring moments when Burns speaks about his employees in terms that suggest he does not quite experience them as fully human as people, with their own inner lives and autonomy, but rather as components in a larger system that exists to serve his purposes. This is characterization that the show deploys for comedy, but the theorists point out that it is also characterization that is entirely consistent with someone who has been treating people as biological resources for a very long time and has simply internalized that practice to the point where it no longer registers as unusual. The theory extends outward from Burns himself to encompass the Springfield nuclear power plant, which is the machine through which Burns exerts most of his practical power over the town. And here is where the theory starts to intersect with ideas that will become increasingly important as we move through the later sections of tonight's exploration. The nuclear plant is not just Burns's business. It is his instrument of control. It employs a significant portion of Springfield's workforce. It provides the town's power. Its emissions, the waste it produces, the byproducts it releases, the ambient radiation that forms a permanent background note in Springfield's environment touch everyone in the town, whether they work at the plant or not. Burns does not simply own an industry in Springfield. He is, in a very real sense, embedded in the biology of everyone who lives there. And if Burns is the kind of person the theory says he is, someone who evaluates people in terms of their biological utility, someone who has access to resources that allow him to extend his own life at others' expense, someone whose relationship to the people around him is fundamentally extractive, then what does it mean that this person is also the source of the radiation that runs through the town like a slow and invisible river? What does it mean that the man who sees people as resources is also the man whose plant shapes the bodies of those people from the inside? We are not quite ready to answer that question yet. That answer belongs to a later section. For now, hold it as a question. Let it sit with you. Burns is a figure of comedy in The Simpsons, the cartoon plutocrat, the exaggerated villain, the monster with impeccable diction and terrible judgment about the value of human life. The comedy is real, and it is effective, and it has made him one of the most beloved antagonists in television history. But the comedy, as always in Springfield, has something sitting underneath it. In this case, what sits underneath it is the possibility that Burns is not just a satirical exaggeration of wealth and power. He is, the theory suggests, a genuine predator. A man who has lived past his natural span by treating the people around him as a garden he harvests for his own maintenance. A man who smiles at his employees with an expression that might be warmth but is more likely calculation, who asks how you're feeling and listens to the answer not out of care, but out of the same interest a farmer has in knowing whether his crops are healthy. At danger level 4, we are in territory where the comedy starts to feel genuinely strange. Burns has been in the background of this town for over a century. He was here before most of the people who live here were born. He will, by the logic of the theory, be here after most of them are gone. And in the time between their births and their deaths, he will have been watching carefully, patiently, with the long-sightedness of someone who has learned that time is not a constraint but a resource, and assessing what use they might be to him. The yellow house on Evergreen Terrace is warm. The couch is familiar. The family on it loves each other. But a few miles away, there is a building that breathes smoke into the sky day and night, run by a man who has been alive longer than most buildings, and who sees the town around him the way other people see a savings account. Let's move to the water. Section 5, Danger Level 5 out of 10. The Springfield Water Supply Theory. Water is where everything begins. Not metaphorically, literally. Every ecosystem is organized around water. Every human settlement in history has been built near a reliable water source. Water is the precondition for everything else, the fundamental requirement beneath all other requirements, and the quality of a community's water is, in a very direct and non-negotiable sense, the quality of the community's health. Springfield has a river. The Springfielder River runs through the town, occasionally shown in the background of various scenes, occasionally referenced as a location, occasionally used as a setting when the plot requires someone to stand near water. It is not a major visual element of the show. It is part of the scenery, part of the background texture of Springfield's landscape, present without being noticed. But the theorists noticed it. Specifically, they noticed what goes into it. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits upstream of the Springfield water supply. This is a geographical fact that the show establishes in various episodes, sometimes explicitly and sometimes through the visual logic of the town's layout. The plant is upstream, the town drinks downstream, and the plant, as the show depicts it consistently across many episodes and many seasons, does not meet any reasonable standard of waste containment or environmental responsibility. We have seen the three-eyed fish. We have seen the glowing green waste barrels that get tossed into rivers and oceans and backyards with cheerful disregard. We have seen the cooling pipes, the drainage channels, the casual and almost offhand way that the plant handles materials that, in any realistic nuclear facility, would require elaborate, careful, enormously expensive containment protocols. The Springfield water theory starts from this premise. If the plant is upstream and the waste management is as depicted in the show, then the water in Springfield is contaminated. It has been contaminated for decades, for as long as the plant has been operating, which is, by the show's own internal history, a very long time. And if the water is contaminated, then every person who drinks it, cooks with it, bathes in it, waters their garden with it, every person in Springfield has been living inside a slow, continuous, low-level exposure to whatever the plant has been putting into the watershed. This doesn't immediately sound like a theory about The Simpsons as a television show. It sounds like it could be a theory about any real-world industrial town near a poorly regulated facility. And that resemblance, the theorists argue, is part of the point. The Simpsons has always been, at some level, a show about a working-class family living in a town defined by heavy industry. Springfield is not a picturesque New England village or a glossy California suburb. It has a nuclear plant and a tire fire and a monorail that was built by a con man and a power station and a factory district, and all the marks of a community whose economy was built around industrial production and whose infrastructure reflects the decisions of people who prioritize that production over everything else. Real working-class industrial towns have water problems. This is not speculation, it is documented fact. The relationship between industrial production, inadequate regulation, and water contamination is one of the most consistent stories in the history of American industry. Towns built around factories and plants have, historically and repeatedly, discovered that the water they have been drinking for years contains things it should not contain. The damage done by that contaminated water has shaped the health and the bodies and the outcomes of entire communities. Springfield is a cartoon version of such a town. It is comedic and exaggerated and brightly colored. But the underlying structure, the industrial plant, the regulatory indifference, the geography that puts the plant upstream of the community is recognizable as a version of a real pattern. The theory at its most direct suggests that the behavioral and physical oddities of Springfield's residents are not just comedic exaggerations. They are a satirical portrait of what happens to a community when the water that runs through it has been quietly compromised. The three-eyed fish is funny, but three-eyed fish are what happen when you put enough of the wrong things into a river. Springfield's fish are three-eyed because the water made them that way, and the people drink the same water. Now, the show never commits to this directly. The three-eyed fish is treated as a running gag, a symbol of environmental carelessness, rather than as the opening frame of a sustained examination of what contaminated water does to a community. The behavioral quirks of Springfield's residents are characterized as comedic eccentricity rather than as the downstream effects of long-term chemical exposure. The show keeps the comedy intact by not quite acknowledging the implications of the world it has built. But the theorists do acknowledge those implications, and when they follow them, here is what they find. The cognitive and behavioral irregularities that show up across Springfield's population are consistent with patterns associated with specific types of water contamination. Lead exposure, for instance, well documented in its effects on neurological development, particularly in children, produces exactly the kinds of deficits that are exaggerated and played for comedy in Springfield. Impaired impulse control, difficulty with abstract reasoning, shortened attention spans, emotional volatility, reduced capacity for long-term planning. The comedy of Springfield's characters, in this reading, is the comedy of a lead-poisoned community, a community whose collective intelligence and self-regulation have been quietly eroded by years of drinking water that contains things it should not. This is the moment where the theory earns its danger level 5. Because this is the moment where the satire becomes something more than satire. The show has been perhaps without fully intending to, or perhaps with more intention than it ever acknowledged, depicting the consequences of industrial contamination on a working-class community. And it has been depicting those consequences as comedy. The man who stumbles around and says stupid things and forgets the lessons he just learned and makes impulsive decisions that ruin his family's Thanksgiving and accidentally swallows cleaning products and cannot read a basic sign. That man lives in a town with contaminated water, works at the plant that contaminates it, and has been drinking that water his whole adult life. The satire, in this reading, has teeth. It has been saying something uncomfortable about the real world, about the communities built around plants like the one in Springfield, about the people who live in those communities, about the way that industrial contamination gets absorbed into culture as local color and regional personality, and the endearing quirks of the people who live there rather than being recognized as damage. Homer's behavior across the entire series may be partly explained by the crayon in his brain. It may also be partly explained by everything he has been drinking, and every person in Springfield has been drinking the same water, except perhaps for the man who runs the plant. The man who lives in a mansion on the hill, above the town, above the watershed, who drinks differently and eats differently and has been doing so for a very long time, burns again. He is starting to appear as a thread running through all of these theories. The floating timeline preserves his power. The treehouse of horror shows his shadow. Homer's damage makes him manageable. The water supply keeps the town docile. Burns is not incidental to any of these systems. He is, in some readings, the architect of several of them. Hold that thought. We are building toward something, and what we are building toward is the theory that will appear at danger level 9. But first, we need to talk about what the water and the plant have been doing to Springfield's bodies, not just to the minds, but to the physical selves, the shapes and forms and genetic material of the people who have lived inside this environment for generations. The next theory is about mutation. Section 6, danger level 6 out of 10. The nuclear mutation theory. The people of Springfield are yellow. You know this. You have always known this. It is one of the most immediately recognizable visual signatures in all of television, that specific shade of yellow, somewhere between butter and jaundice, that covers the skin of every human character in the show. It is the color of Springfield, the color of The Simpsons, the color that Matt Groening and his team chose in the early days of the show, and that has become so thoroughly associated with the series that it is now essentially its logo. The official explanation when the show's creators have been asked about it is practical and simple. The yellow was chosen because it jumps out on television. It is distinctive. It reads immediately. When you are flipping through channels and you see that color, you know instantly what you are looking at. The yellow is a branding decision, a visual trademark, a solution to the challenge of making the show immediately recognizable in the cluttered landscape of television. That is the practical explanation, and it is probably true in the sense that it was likely a real consideration in the decision. But the nuclear mutation theory offers a different explanation, an in-universe explanation. An explanation that lives inside the world of Springfield rather than outside it, in the creative decisions of the production team. The yellow, the theory suggests, is radiation damage. It is specifically the result of multi-generational exposure to low-level nuclear radiation, the kind of exposure that doesn't kill you quickly and dramatically, the kind that doesn't produce immediate, obvious symptoms, the kind that works slowly and cumulatively over years and decades and generations, changing the body in ways that are subtle at first and only become visible at the population level after the exposure has been sustained for long enough to work itself into the biology of an entire community. The Springfield nuclear power plant has been operating for a very long time. Depending on which episode you're using to establish the timeline, it has been part of Springfield's landscape for somewhere between 40 and 60 years. That is 2, possibly 3, generations of Springfield residents who have grown up within the radiation envelope of the plant, who have breathed the air it affects, drunk the water it contaminates, lived in the environmental field it creates. And the theory proposes that across those generations, that exposure has produced a visible physical change in the population. The yellow skin is the marker. It is the biological signature of a community that has been living inside chronic low-level radiation exposure long enough for that exposure to change how the body looks. Now, the immediate scientific objection to this is straightforward. Radiation exposure does not typically turn people yellow. The effects of radiation on the human body are well documented and include things like hair loss, tissue damage, increased cancer rates, and immune suppression, but not yellowing of the skin. The theory, taken literally as a biological proposition, doesn't work. But the theorists who advance it aren't primarily making a biological argument. They are making a symbolic one. They are saying the show is depicting, in its exaggerated and cartoon logic way, a community that has been visibly changed by what lives in its environment. The yellow is shorthand for that change, a way of showing, at a glance, that these people are not quite like the people outside Springfield, that something in their environment has left its mark on their bodies in a way that is permanent and heritable and shared across the whole population. The yellow skin means we have been here a long time, and this place has been changing us, and the change is so complete and so universal that we don't even notice it anymore. It is just what people look like here. Think about what that means in terms of normalization. Normalization is the process by which things that should be alarming become ordinary. It happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, and it is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. You stop noticing the thing that should alarm you because it has been present for so long that it has become part of the background, part of the definition of normal, part of the way things simply are. The alarm that should be triggered every time you encounter the thing has been smoothed away by repetition. The residents of Springfield do not look at each other and see yellow skin and think, something in our environment is doing this to us. They look at each other and see their neighbors. They see the faces of their friends and family. They see normal. And because they see normal, they do not ask the question that the yellow skin taken seriously should prompt. They do not ask what made them this way. They do not look upstream. The nuclear mutation theory is, at this level of analysis, a theory about normalization as much as it is a theory about radiation. It is asking, what does it mean to live inside a consequence that has become so familiar that you can no longer see it as a consequence? What does it mean when the evidence of what is happening to you has been incorporated into your self-image so completely that challenging it would feel like challenging your own identity? The show depicts this with complete accuracy, the theorists argue. Springfield's residents are not alarmed by what is happening to them because they have never had a baseline for comparison. They were born into the environment. They grew up in it. It shaped them before they had any framework for understanding what shape they should have been. The mutation, if that is what it is, predates their self-awareness. It is them. There is something deeply uncomfortable about this idea, and the discomfort isn't just about radiation and cartoons. It is about the more general human experience of being shaped by your environment in ways you cannot see because you were inside the shaping from the beginning. Every community does this to its members, to varying degrees. Every environment, physical, social, cultural, changes the people who grow up inside it in ways those people don't fully recognize. Because the change happened during the process of becoming themselves, not after. Springfield is an extreme version of something true, and the nuclear mutation theory asks you to look at the yellow skin not as a joke about the show's aesthetic choices, not as a branding decision explained away, but as a portrait of a community that has been changed by its environment and doesn't know it. A portrait of people who are the living result of decades of decisions made above them and around them and upstream of them, decisions they had no part in making, and whose consequences they wear on the surface of their own bodies. The next section will discuss what happens when you follow this line of thinking, the changed environment, the shaped bodies, the normalized consequences, all the way to its logical extreme. When you take the pattern of Springfield and zoom out far enough to see it in relation to the actual world, to documented events and real predictions and things the show appeared to know before they happened, that is where the theory becomes, for some viewers, genuinely troubling. We are at danger level 6. The air in this section of the conversation has shifted a little. The warmth is still there, the town is still warm, the family is still real, the love is still recognizable. But the warmth now has a context, and the context complicates it. Breathe slowly. We're going deeper. Section 7. Danger Level. 7 out of 10. The Simpsons Predictive Programming Theory. In 2000, The Simpsons aired an episode in which Donald Trump became President of the United States. The episode, Bart to the Future, was a flash-forward story set in a future where Lisa Simpson is the first straight female president of the United States. In her Oval Office, she references the budget that President Trump left us in passing a throwaway joke, a single line, something meant to gesture at the absurdity of a future America. In 2000, Donald Trump had run briefly for president in 1999 and withdrawn from the race. He was a businessman, a television personality, a brand. The joke was that someone like Trump, a real estate mogul, a showman, a figure of celebrity wealth had somehow ended up in the Oval Office. The absurdity was the point. 16 years later, it happened. The internet understandably noticed. The clip circulated. The discussion exploded. The writers of the episode gave interviews explaining the logic of the joke that Trump was simply the most absurdist figure they could imagine as a disastrous president. That the joke was about celebrity culture and American politics, that they weren't predicting anything. And that explanation is almost certainly true and accurate. But the Trump prediction was not the only one. And this is where the theory gains its traction, because a single coincidence is easy to dismiss and a pattern is harder. The Simpsons predicted the existence of smartwatches, with a wrist-sized video communication device appearing in a 1995 episode. The show depicted a 3D printer-like device producing objects on demand in 1998. It referenced tobacco, a hybrid tomato-tobacco plant, years before scientists actually created such a hybrid, apparently partly inspired by the episode. The show depicted a video call interface that looks remarkably like the experience of a video conference call in an episode that aired 15 years before that experience became ubiquitous. It depicted an automatic meat roll that looks functionally identical to a product introduced by a fast food chain years later. It depicted the Higgs boson particle using a specific equation in a 1998 episode, an equation that, when analyzed by a physicist, turned out to be remarkably close to the actual value of the Higgs boson mass, which was not experimentally confirmed until 2012. There are more. The list is long, and it has been documented extensively online by people who are genuinely interested in the question of what is going on here. The predictive programming theory offers an answer, and it comes in two versions, a skeptical version and a conspiratorial version. The skeptical version is the more defensible one, and it is probably closer to the truth, and it is still genuinely interesting. It says, The Simpsons wrote about the near future for 30-plus years, with a writing staff of some of the most educated and intellectually curious comedy writers in television. They had access to science, to economics, to political history, to cultural trend analysis. They were thinking about where the world was going not because they were trying to predict anything, but because good satire requires understanding where the thing you're satirizing is headed. And over 30 years of thoughtful, smart speculation about the near future, Some of what they guessed inevitably came true. This is a real phenomenon. It has a name, Nostradamus effect, or more charitably, the law of large numbers applied to creative speculation. If you produce enough guesses about the future, some of them will be right. If your guesses are made by smart people thinking carefully about observable trends, a somewhat higher percentage will be right. The Simpsons prediction compilations are a curated highlight reel. They show you the hits and leave out the misses, of which there are many. The skeptical version of the theory respects the writing staff's intelligence without attributing to them supernatural foresight. The conspiratorial version of the theory is less defensible and considerably more interesting to think about in the dark. It says, the hits are too specific. The Higgs boson equation is too specific. The Trump presidency is too specific. The detail in some of the technology predictions is too specific to be explained by smart people making educated guesses. The conspiratorial version says that someone connected to the Simpsons production, someone with access to the script, or someone in a position to influence what stories got told, had foreknowledge of certain events. Or alternatively, that The Simpsons was used as a vehicle for a specific kind of cultural preparation, showing populations future events in comedic, fictional form to reduce the shock when those events actually occurred. This is the predictive programming part of the theory. The idea that one way to make a population accepting of changes that would otherwise alarm them is to present those changes first as entertainment. If you've already seen it as a joke, already laughed at it, already processed it through the safe channel of fiction, then when it happens in reality, you have a framework for it. The alarm response is muted because the thing is already in some sense familiar. The specific claim of predictive programming is not that the show is predicting things by accident. It is that the show is being used consciously or unconsciously by individuals with particular interests or as part of a broader cultural pattern to acclimate the public to things that are coming, to soften the landing. Now, here is what makes this theory genuinely interesting rather than just conspiratorial noise. You do not have to believe the strong version, the version with deliberate agents and specific coordination, to find the weaker version compelling. The weaker version says, popular culture has always served a function of social preparation. Stories have always been one of the ways that communities process changes before those changes arrive, that they rehearse futures they don't yet inhabit, that they develop emotional frameworks for events that haven't happened yet. This is one of the things fiction is for. This is why dystopian novels get popular before the things they describe become relevant. This is why horror cycles tend to cluster around periods of social anxiety. The Simpsons in this reading is doing what all significant popular culture does, absorbing the anxieties and possibilities of its moment, processing them through the safe container of comedy, and returning them to its audience in a form that is easier to sit with. When the writers imagined Trump as president in 2000, they were doing exactly what good satire does, identifying a real tendency in American life and following it to an extreme conclusion. The fact that the conclusion turned out to be accurate is not evidence of foreknowledge. It is evidence that the writers were paying very careful attention. But it does raise a question worth sitting with in the dark. What else have they been paying careful attention to? What other currents in American and global life have they identified and followed to extreme conclusions that haven't yet arrived? What is Springfield? In its future episodes and its flash-forward stories, gesturing at that we haven't caught up to yet. The show has depicted collapse, environmental catastrophe, political failure, technological dystopia, medical disaster, social fragmentation. It has held all of these possibilities up to the comic light, made them laugh-shaped, made them survivable in the way that things only survive in fiction by being contained, by having a resolution, by ending before they become truly irreversible. The predictive programming theory, at its most benign, is a meditation on the relationship between fiction and reality. Between the stories a culture tells itself and the futures, those stories are already beginning to map. Between the yellow town on the screen and the towns that it reflects, however distorted the reflection. At danger level 7, this theory is the one that most directly asks you to consider the relationship between Springfield and the world you actually live in. The other theories have been about the internal logic of the show. This one is about the show's relationship to history, to events that happened, and to events that haven't happened yet. Whatever you make of it, take a breath. What follows is the theory that changes everything. Or rather, the theory that proposes that everything was already changed, that a fundamental event occurred very early in the show's history, and that everything we have been watching since then has been the aftermath of that event, filtered through the consciousness of a man who may not be entirely aware of what is real. Section 8 Danger. Level 8 out of 10. The Homer Coma Theory. On the 1st of April, 1993, in the 18th episode of the 4th season of The Simpsons, a vending machine fell on Homer Simpson and put him into a coma. Let that sentence settle for a moment. Not the comedy of it, not the absurdity of the escalating prank war with Bart that preceded the vending machine, not the particular Simpsons logic of a man being first hospitalized by an exploding beer can and then, while recovering in the hospital, being crushed by the very machine he was trying to steal a candy bar from. Let all of that settle into the background and just stay with the plain fact of it. Homer Simpson entered a coma on the 1st of April, 1993. The episode resolves in the way that Simpsons episodes resolve. Bart, tearful, confesses at his father's bedside that the whole chain of events began with his prank. Homer, moved by his son's guilt, snaps awake. The family is together again. The credits roll, and then the show keeps going, as it has always kept going, and the coma becomes another entry in the long list of things that happened in Springfield and were then forgotten by the next episode. Except that there are fans of this show who do not believe Homer ever actually woke up. The Homer coma theory is the most extensively documented, most carefully argued, most widely discussed fan theory in the history of The Simpsons. It has been debated in articles and forums and comment sections for decades. It has been acknowledged by the show's own writers, acknowledged and, officially, denied. And the denial, when you examine it closely, does not quite do the work that it is meant to do. The theory, in its simplest form, is this. Homer did not wake up from his coma. Everything that has occurred in The Simpsons after that April 1993 episode is a dream, a long, elaborate, increasingly surreal dream generated by the unconscious mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly metabolizing the damage done by a vending machine and a lifetime of accumulated chaos, dreaming of his family because his family is the thing he loves most in the world, and his dreaming mind, freed from the constraints of waking logic, can give him everything. The evidence for this theory is distributed across the entire history of the show, and the most compelling pieces of it are not obscure details that require careful searching. They are sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to connect them to one another. Start with the tonal shift. Anyone who has watched The Simpsons from its beginning and tracked its evolution across seasons has noticed that the show changes somewhere around the midpoint of its 4th season and the beginning of its 5th. The change is not subtle when you are looking for it. The early Simpsons, the first 3 seasons, and to a somewhat lesser degree the 4th, is a show about a working-class family navigating recognizable human problems. Homer trying to provide for his family, Marge trying to keep everything together, Bart struggling with school and identity, Lisa struggling with being too smart for her environment. The emotional register is warm but grounded. The comedy is sharp but anchored in situations that feel, at some level, real. And then the shift happens. Homer goes to space, Homer joins a secret society, Homer becomes a professional wrestler, Homer befriends a mobster, Homer discovers his mother is a fugitive revolutionary, Homer meets God. Homer travels to dozens of countries. Homer holds, across the course of the later series, somewhere in the range of 200 different jobs. The show becomes increasingly untethered from the gravitational center of working-class family life that defined its early seasons, and it floats outward into something that is still comedic, still featuring the same characters in the same house, but operating in a completely different register, one that is wilder, stranger, more willing to bend and break the internal logic of the world it has established. The coma theory says, this is not the show changing, this is Homer's brain changing. This is the unconscious mind of a man in a coma, starting in its waking-adjacent state close enough to consciousness that the early dream episodes feel grounded and real, and slowly drifting deeper, into the more genuinely dreamlike territory where the rules of cause and effect loosen, where impossible things happen without explanation, where the same person can be a nuclear safety inspector and a space traveler and a mob associate and a vigilante leader across different nights of dreaming. Dreams work this way. They start close to the surface and they drift. The early part of a long dream has the texture of memory or experience. It is recognizable, it feels real, it has the weight and specificity of something that actually happened. And then, as the dreaming deepens, it lets go of that texture. The connections become more associative. The logic becomes more personal. The characters begin to do things they would not do in waking life. And the dreamer accepts this without question because in the dream, the continuity of the character is preserved even when their behavior is not. This is the structural experience of watching The Simpsons from beginning to end. The early episodes have the texture of memory. The later episodes have the texture of deep dreaming. There is another piece of evidence that the theorists return to again and again, and it exists not in the coma episode itself, but in an episode that aired 6 months before it. In Homer the Heretic, the third episode of the fourth season, Homer has a conversation with God. An actual conversation. God appears to Homer in a dream, and they talk. And during that conversation, God tells Homer that he will one day know the meaning of life, but that his time is not yet. God says that Homer's time is coming. 6 months before the coma, God told Homer his time was coming. The theorists who have built the Homer coma case point to this as something more than coincidence. They point to it as a structural marker, the show planting a signal before the event, the way that good fiction plants signals before its turning points. Homer's time is coming. And 6 months later, a vending machine falls on him and he enters a coma, and everything that follows is the long process of a man's mind running out its remaining time. There is also the matter of what Homer loses in the coma. The episode, before its comedic resolution, establishes that Homer has lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5% permanently gone, never coming back. The show plays this for a quick laugh. Homer learns about the brain damage, laughs, says he doesn't know why he's laughing, and the family laughs with him. It is funny in the moment. It is also, if you follow it, the show telling you that the Homer who wakes up is not quite the same Homer who went in, a diminished Homer. An Homer with less of himself than he had before. And in every subsequent season, that diminishment compounds. The Homer of the early episodes is foolish but recognizably human. The Homer of the later episodes is increasingly untethered, increasingly cartoon, increasingly dreamlike in the specific way that a person becomes dreamlike when the mind that is imagining them is running on less than it had before, when the dream is deepening and the sleeper is drifting further from the surface. The celebrity appearances that proliferate in the later seasons fit this theory with almost uncomfortable precision. In the early seasons, Springfield is a small world, the same recurring faces, the same community, a world that feels populated by people who have been living here their whole lives. In the later seasons, famous people appear constantly, in almost every episode, often for no reason that the plot requires. Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, Tom Jones. Hundreds of celebrities appearing in Springfield and interacting with the family as if it is completely normal. The coma theory says these celebrities are sounds. They are voices drifting in from outside Homer's hospital room, from the television in the corner, from conversations happening at his bedside, from the radio that someone has left on in the hallway. Homer's dreaming mind absorbs these sounds and incorporates them into the dream, translating names and voices it half hears through the fog of unconsciousness into characters that show up in Springfield and speak lines that Homer's brain constructs for them. Every celebrity who has ever appeared in the later seasons of The Simpsons is, in this reading, a voice that Homer heard from very far away and couldn't quite make out clearly. And the character who walks into every episode, who is always at the center, who the dream always returns to no matter how far it ranges, that character is Homer, because it is his dream. He is the one dreaming. And in dreams, you are always there, always at the center. Always the eye through which the world is being seen. The dream cannot exist without the dreamer. Springfield cannot exist without Homer, which is why every story comes back to him, why every situation eventually involves him, why the world of the show has always been organized around one man and his family and the house on Evergreen Terrace. It is his dream. He built it. He keeps it running because keeping it running means staying close to the people he loves, even in the only form of closeness that is available to him. And this is where the coma theory stops being a detective story about narrative inconsistencies and becomes something else entirely. Something that doesn't require you to care about the mechanics of the theory at all. Something that works at a purely emotional level. Homer Simpson is in a hospital bed. He has been there since 1993. And every night, he dreams of his family. He dreams of Marge the way you dream of someone you love, with a completeness that waking life never quite achieves, with every detail present and vivid and exactly right. He dreams of Bart's laugh. He dreams of Lisa's saxophone. He dreams of Maggie's weight in his arms, the specific warmth of a baby who is small enough to hold completely. He dreams of the couch and the television and the smell of whatever Marge has cooking, and he holds all of it together in his sleeping mind with a concentration that is the concentrated form of love. A father's love for his family, projected outward into a world that exists only to hold them, only to keep them present, only to make sure that when Homer's brain reaches for the thing that matters most, it is there. The dream gives him adventures because a dreaming mind reaches for spectacle. It gives him celebrity encounters because the outside world keeps inserting itself through the noise of the hospital room. It gives him increasingly surreal plots because the deeper you sleep, the further the dream drifts from the logic of waking. But it always, always, always comes back to the family, to the house, to the moment of reunion at the end of the episode when everything is okay again and the couch is warm and everyone is there. The dream always comes home. Because that is the one thing Homer's dreaming mind will not give up. No matter how strange the episode gets, no matter how far from Springfield the plot travels, no matter how outlandish the situation becomes, there is always a return. There is always a moment at the end where the family is together, where the crisis is resolved, where the warmth comes back. The dream insists on that moment. It manufactures it every single episode because the dreamer needs it. The dreamer needs to go home. The coma theory does not make The Simpsons a tragedy. Not exactly. It makes it something more complicated than tragedy. It makes it a portrait of love specifically, of the kind of love that creates its own world to live inside of, that refuses the constraints of what is actually possible, and builds something that feels real because it has to feel real, because the alternative is waking up in a hospital bed and discovering how much time has passed. Homer doesn't wake up because he doesn't want to. The dream is not a prison. It is a choice. It is the choice that the deepest and most loving part of him keeps making, over and over, every night since April of 1993. The choice to stay in the house on Evergreen Terrace, where the kids are still young and the beer is cold and nobody has had to say goodbye yet. There are people who cannot watch the show the same way after encountering this theory. There are people for whom it changes the entire experience who sit through episodes now, not watching a comedy, but watching a man dream, watching a man love, watching a man hold the most important things in his life together inside, the only space where holding them together is still possible. I don't think that's the wrong way to watch it. We have one more section before we reach the end tonight, and the next two sections contain the theories that are genuinely, seriously dangerous, the ones that, if you follow them completely, do not just reframe the show, but dismantle the comfortable world it has built and replace it with something that requires real courage to look at directly. Are you still comfortable? Still warm? Good. Let's go a little further. Section 9. Danger Level 9 out of 10. Burns's deliberate population management theory. Everything we have discussed so far has been building to this. Every thread we have followed, the contaminated water, the radiation, the floating timeline, the cognitive damage, the medical conspiracy, the predictive programming, the coma, every single one of these threads, if you follow it far enough, leads back to the same place. It leads back to the hill above Springfield, to the mansion with the long driveway and the impossibly old man standing at the window looking down at the town below. It leads back to Charles Montgomery Burns. The theory at Danger Level 9 does not propose that Burns is simply negligent about the harm his plant causes. Negligence would be bad enough. The idea of a man who knows his facility is leaking radiation into the community and simply doesn't care because the cost of caring is too high. Negligence is a recognizable human failure, one with thousands of real-world analogs, one that the satire of The Simpsons has always been comfortable acknowledging. The Danger Level 9 theory proposes something considerably darker. It proposes that the harm is not negligence, it is policy. It proposes that Burns understands, with precise clarity, exactly what his plant is doing to Springfield, that he has understood this for decades. That he has monitored the effects, employed researchers to study them, collected data on the population's changing cognitive profiles, their behavioral patterns, their capacity for organization and resistance. That he uses this data, that the particular quality of Springfield's population, their impulsiveness, their short memories, their difficulty with sustained critical thinking, their almost total inability to organize sustained collective action against the thing that is harming them is not, from Burns's perspective, a side effect of his operations. It is a feature of them. A population that cannot think critically is a population that cannot resist. A population with impaired long-term memory cannot sustain a grievance long enough to act on it. A population with damaged impulse control can be provoked and then managed. A population with compromised reasoning cannot construct the kind of sustained logical argument that would be needed to build a legal case, mount a political campaign, or organize an effective civic response to an industrial polluter. Burns runs his plant in a town full of people who are precisely and specifically incapable of challenging him. And the theory suggests that this is not an accident. Think about what this requires Burns to be. Not just wealthy, not just ruthless in the ordinary way of wealthy men, but something more deliberate and more specific than that. It requires him to be a systems thinker, someone who looks at a community not as a collection of individuals, but as a mechanism, as a machine with inputs and outputs, as something that can be tuned and adjusted and maintained in a desired state through the careful management of its environmental conditions. This is, in fact, exactly how the show characterizes him. Burns does not see people, he sees variables. He does not have employees, he has components. He does not think about how his decisions affect the people around him because the people around him do not register as people in the way that they would to someone with normal human empathy. They are factors in a calculation, and the calculation has always been the same. How do I maintain my position? How do I keep the plant running? How do I ensure that the town, which I depend on for labor and political compliance and the basic infrastructure of my operations, remains in a state where it is willing and able to continue serving those functions? The answer, the theory proposes, is the water and the air. The answer is the radiation. The answer is the specific, calibrated maintenance of a population at a level of cognitive capacity that is just sufficient for them to perform their functions, to show up for work, to operate the equipment, to pay their bills and buy their groceries and raise their children, but not sufficient for them to see the larger picture clearly enough to be alarmed by what they see in it. It is a form of management that has no official name, because it is not a thing that official discourse acknowledges as a possible thing. But the unofficial version of it, the satirical version, the cartoon version, is what The Simpsons has been depicting for 36 years. The show offers specific evidence for this reading, and it is not indirect evidence. Consider what happens when the plant is briefly sold to a group of German investors. The very first thing the German investors do after taking ownership is fire Homer. They recognize immediately that Homer is not a functional safety inspector, that his presence in the role is not simply incompetence born of bureaucratic failure, but something more like a deliberate placement. They see a man who sleeps at his workstation and falls asleep during emergencies and responds to alarms with food rather than action, and they think, this is not an oversight. This cannot be an oversight. Someone chose to put this man in this position, and they are right. Burns chose to put Homer in this position, not, perhaps, through explicit, deliberate calculation on the day Homer was hired. The show is not that literal, but through a pattern of choices that consistently maintained Homer's employment, regardless of his performance, that protected Homer from the consequences of his failures, that kept Homer in the role that was most useful to Burns's broader management of the plant and the town. When the German investors attempt to bring the plant up to code, to actually fix the things that are broken, to actually address the violations, to actually operate the facility as a safe facility rather than a continuously leaking one, they discover that the cost is so astronomical that it nearly bankrupts them. The plant's violations are not minor. They are not the kind of violations that were overlooked due to cost-cutting or regulatory capture. They are the violations of a facility that has been operated over a very long time, with the specific goal of doing as little containment as possible. Burns buys the plant back when the German investors fail. He rehires Homer immediately. The status quo is restored. Consider also the episode in which Homer's IQ is temporarily raised to functional levels through the removal of the crayon. The show does not explore, in any sustained way, what Homer does with his temporarily restored intelligence. He does some things, he writes a report about the plant's safety violations, he experiences the loneliness of intelligence in a world that doesn't value it, he chooses to have the crayon replaced, but the show doesn't dwell on the content of the safety report. It doesn't tell us what Homer, with a fully functional brain, discovers about the plant. It moves past that information quickly, with a joke about the report being ignored. The theorists want you to think about what was in that report, about what Homer, with all his direct proximity to the plant's operations across decades of employment, would have known and been able to articulate if his brain had been functioning correctly, about what kind of document a Homer Simpson with an IQ of 105 rather than 55 would have produced after a lifetime of working in direct contact with the facility's most dangerous operations. And then the theorists want you to think about the fact that the report was ignored, that Homer chose to have the crayon replaced, that the information he had, the information that a functioning brain could access and articulate and make use of, went back into the fog, voluntarily. Because being smart enough to see the truth of Springfield was more painful than not being smart enough to see it. The system, in this reading, has a self-correcting mechanism. Even when someone inside it gains enough cognitive capacity to perceive and articulate what the system is doing, the system finds a way to suppress that perception. Sometimes through external pressure, sometimes through the internal weight of the suppressed person's own despair, through the discovery that seeing clearly in a world that refuses clarity is a particular kind of loneliness that most people, given the choice, will opt out of. Homer chose the crayon. Springfield chose the lie. The real Seymour Skinner was tied to a train and expelled from the community. Lisa keeps fighting and keeps being ignored. The system works. The deepest and most troubling aspect of the Burns population management theory is not what it says about Burns specifically. Burns is a cartoon villain, exaggerated, operatic, comedically monstrous in ways that make him easier to hold at arm's length. The deepest and most troubling aspect is what it says about systems in general, about the way that power maintains itself, about the relationship between environmental conditions and cognitive capacity, about the specific kind of cruelty that doesn't announce itself as cruelty because it works through the air and the water and the biology of a community rather than through direct, visible action. The cruelty that looks like circumstances. The exploitation that looks like the way things are. The management of a population that looks, from the inside, like the ordinary texture of a difficult life. Springfield is a cartoon. The plant is fictional. Burns is not a real person. But the pattern, the theory describes the pattern of power maintaining itself through the degradation of the conditions in which ordinary people live, through the management of the environment in ways that shape what the people inside that environment are capable of thinking, and doing. That pattern is not fictional. That pattern has real-world manifestations. It has addresses and histories and names. The satire of The Simpsons has always been aimed at something. At danger level 9, the aim is visible. And what it is aimed at is not comfortable to look at, even through the soft amber light of a cartoon about a yellow family in an impossible town. One more section? The last theory. The most dangerous one. The theory that asks, what if everything, the radiation, the coma, the management, the water, the mutations, the floating timeline, the normalized horror, the deliberate suppression of truth, what if all of these things are not competing explanations for what is wrong with Springfield, but are instead a single, unified answer to a question that the show has never quite asked out loud? What if Springfield itself is trying to tell us where it is? Section 10 Danger Level, 10 out of 10. The Springfield Purgatory Theory. Let me tell you what all of these theories have in common. Every theory we have explored tonight, the floating timeline, the treehouse bleed, Homer's brain damage, the Burns medical conspiracy, the contaminated water, the nuclear mutations, the predictive programming, the coma, the deliberate population management, every single one of them arrives at the same structural observation through a different path. The observation is, Springfield is a place where time doesn't work, where consequences don't stick, where the same events repeat without producing the cumulative change that events are supposed to produce, where people are held in a suspended state of becoming, without ever quite becoming, where an enormous amount happens and nothing truly changes, where the characters return to the same positions at the end of every episode, like hands returning to a clock face between ticks. Each theory explains this observation differently. The coma theory says it's a dream. The radiation theory says it's biological stasis. The water theory says it's cognitive damage. The Burns theory says it's managed suppression, but they are all trying to explain the same phenomenon. They are all looking at the same impossible stillness at the center of Springfield and offering different accounts of what is generating it. The purgatory theory says they are all correct. And the reason they are all correct is that the thing they are describing, the suspended time, the impossible stasis, the endless loop, the return without change, is not the result of radiation or dreams or water or management. It is the nature of the place itself. It is what this place is. Springfield is purgatory. Now, before I lose you to the seriousness of that word, before you hear purgatory and think of a specific religious context that may or may not resonate with you, let me set aside the theological definition and use the word in its more colloquial, more universal sense. Purgatory in this context does not require a specific theology. It requires only the concept of a transitional state, a place between other places, a condition between other conditions, a state of waiting that exists between what was and what will be, in which the normal rules of time and consequence are suspended because the beings in this state are not yet in the place where those rules apply. Purgatory, in this sense, is a place where you are working something out, where something unresolved is in the process of being resolved, where you are neither where you came from nor where you are going, and the particular texture of that in-between space, its strange stillness, its sense of repetition, its feeling that the same things keep happening because the same lessons keep needing to be learned, is the experience of being in it. Springfield, the purgatory theory proposes, is exactly this kind of place. Look at what the Simpson family is working out. Homer is working out the question of whether love is enough, whether a man who loves his family imperfectly, who fails them regularly, who is limited and damaged and impulsive and cognitively diminished, whether that man's love is sufficient, whether the love counts even when the expression of it keeps going wrong, whether being a deeply flawed person who deeply loves his children is a life worth living and a family worth having. Every episode is a variation on this question. Every episode tests it in a different way and arrives at the same provisional answer. Yes, the love counts. The love is real. The family holds. But the answer never accumulates into certainty. The question keeps being asked because it hasn't yet been fully answered, not because Homer hasn't learned anything, but because the learning isn't what's required. What's required is the asking. The ongoing, daily, episode-by-episode act of choosing to try again, of choosing the family, of choosing the love over the alternative. That is what Homer is working out in Springfield. He is working out whether he is, at the deepest level, the father and the husband he wants to be, not by being that person perfectly, but by wanting to be that person sincerely, over and over, in the face of every failure. Marge is working out whether patience is its own form of courage. Whether staying, which the culture around her consistently undervalues as passive, as unambitious, as the choice made by someone who lacks better options, is actually the harder choice. Whether the domestic love she practices, the love that is present in every meal and every carefully considered word and every moment of choosing to return to a relationship that is consistently more difficult than it might be, whether that love is a form of heroism or a form of self-erasure. She doesn't know the answer. The show doesn't know the answer. And Springfield keeps her in the question because the question matters, because she has not yet arrived at the answer that would release her from the need to keep asking it. Bart is working out whether he is fundamentally good. He does cruel things. He causes harm. He acts without considering consequences. He is, on the surface, the kind of person that his society has decided to label as a problem, the difficult child, the troublemaker, the one who doesn't fit. And underneath all of that, there is a boy who loves his family with a fierceness that takes him by surprise, who is capable of genuine remorse when his actions cause real harm, who keeps being drawn back to the people he loves, even when the version of himself he presents to the world would prefer to be indifferent to all of them. Bart is working out the relationship between who you act like and who you are. He is working out whether the self you perform to protect yourself from the world is the self you are, or whether there is something truer underneath it. Lisa is working out whether it is possible to stay whole in a world that doesn't want you whole. She is the intelligence that Springfield doesn't reward. She is the conscience that Springfield doesn't want. She is the one who sees clearly in a town that has organized itself around not seeing, and the question her life in Springfield asks over and over, without resolution, is whether it is better to stay and keep seeing, to keep insisting on truth in a place that has voted to exile truth, or to go, to leave, to find the world that she keeps believing exists somewhere beyond the edge of the town, the world that would value her for what she is instead of punishing her for it. She doesn't go. The show won't let her go. And in the context of the purgatory theory, this is significant. She doesn't go, because going is not what this stage is for. This stage is for learning something she can only learn by staying. Something about the relationship between integrity and belonging. Something about what it costs to refuse compromise. Something that she has not yet fully learned, which is why the clock keeps returning to the same position, and the lesson keeps being offered again and Maggie. Maggie is the most interesting figure in the purgatory theory, because Maggie is the one who seems to understand the nature of the place she inhabits better than any of the others. Maggie doesn't speak. In 36 years, she has spoken once a single word, her first word, Daddy, spoken in the voice of Elizabeth Taylor, in an episode that treated the moment with such weight and such care that you understood immediately why it happened only once. The word was enough. It said everything she needed to say, and then she went back to silence. The purgatory theory proposes that Maggie is silent because she knows. She understands at whatever level of awareness is available to a 1-year-old who has somehow been 1-year-old for 36 years, the nature of the place she is in. She knows that this is a transitional state. She knows that words, in this context, would be a kind of commitment, a commitment to a version of herself that is not yet fully formed, a staking out of a position that the moment does not yet call for. She watches, she waits, she absorbs, she saves her voice for the moment, when the lesson is learned and the resolution is reached and the question is answered and it is finally time to go. She has been saving her voice for 36 years. In Springfield as purgatory, the specific quality of the afterlife, or the between life, the transitional state is determined by what the soul in question needs to resolve. The family was placed in Springfield because Springfield is the precise environment required for the resolution they need. The town has not randomly configured its features. The nuclear plant and the complicated employer and the contaminated water and the toxic relationships and the beautiful, difficult love at the center of it all are exactly calibrated to the questions the family needs to answer. This sounds almost too neat, too deliberate, too much like a theory that was designed to be beautiful rather than true. But here is what makes it worth sitting with. Even if you hold it loosely, even if you take it as metaphor rather than as a claim about the show's literal meaning, the questions that the Simpson family is working out in Springfield, Homer's question about imperfect love, Marge's question about the value of staying, Bart's question about the relationship between performance and self, Lisa's question about integrity in a world that punishes it, Maggie's question, which is still forming itself and hasn't yet found words, these are not cartoon questions. They are not the questions of fictional characters in a fictional world. They are the questions that real people carry through their lives, the questions that don't resolve easily and don't resolve once, but have to be answered over and over in different situations in different years. The Simpsons, across 36 seasons, has been returning to these questions because these are the questions that don't go away. They are the questions that define human life, particularly family life, particularly the specific kind of imperfect, complicated, devoted, infuriating, irreplaceable family life that the show has always been about. Springfield is purgatory because every family is purgatory. In some sense, every household is a place where its members are working out the questions that they cannot yet answer, repeating the patterns that haven't yet released them, returning to the same positions and the same tests because the test hasn't yet been passed. Not because the family is failing, because the test is ongoing, because the learning is ongoing, because becoming the people they are capable of being is a project that does not complete itself in a single episode or a single season or a single lifetime. The purgatory theory says that Springfield is a place outside normal time because the work that is being done there is outside normal time. It belongs to a different order of experience, the order of deepest learning, of most fundamental change, of the kind of becoming that can only happen when the soul is freed from the pressure of consequence and given the space to ask its question again from a slightly different angle until the question opens into something it couldn't have opened into before. And when it opens, when Homer finally, fully, completely understands what love requires of him, when Marge arrives at the certainty that her choices were her choices and they were right, when Bart finds the thing that makes performance unnecessary, when Lisa discovers the world beyond the edge of town and finds that it is, in some ways, not as different from Springfield as she hoped, and in other ways more beautiful than she imagined, when Maggie draws a breath and says her second word, then the show will end. Not because the network canceled it, not because the ratings fell, but because the question will have been answered. The work will have been done, and Springfield will no longer be needed for the purpose that Springfield was built to serve. Until that moment, the couch will be there. The family will gather. The credits will roll. And Homer will stand in the kitchen on a Tuesday evening, holding a beer he doesn't really need, looking through the doorway at the living room where his family is assembled in the warm yellow light. And for a moment that is always available to him, always present, always just one turn of his head away, he will know that this is the thing that matters. This, specifically, this family, this house. This life that has always been harder than it should be and more full than he deserved. He will know it, and he will almost be able to say it, and then the moment will pass and he will do something foolish, and the family will respond, and the episode will find its shape, and the resolution will come, and everything will be exactly as it was before. And that is beautiful, not despite the repetition, but because of it, because the love that survives repetition, that returns through failure, that chooses to stay in the difficulty rather than leave for somewhere easier, that love is the truest form of love there is. It is the love that doesn't need to be perfect, because it doesn't stop when it isn't. It is the love that keeps showing up, keeps choosing, keeps finding its way back to the couch and the family in the ordinary Tuesday evening where nothing extraordinary is happening, except for the fact that everyone is here, and everyone is trying, and the light is warm, and that's enough. That's always been enough. Springfield exists because it has to, because there are things that can only be worked out in a place like Springfield, in a family like this one, in this specific combination of chaos and warmth and difficulty and love. The town is impossible. The family is impossible in all the ways that real families are impossible: too much, too loud, too broken in specific ways, too fiercely held together by something that the characters themselves can barely articulate. But they keep going. The loop keeps turning. The couch keeps catching them. That is the purgatory theory at danger level 10. The most dangerous thing about it is not that it makes Springfield sinister. It is that it makes Springfield sacred. Closing where Springfield ends and somewhere else begins. We started tonight with the floating timeline, the gentle, fond observation that Springfield doesn't age, that the characters remain suspended in the same stage of their lives while decades pass in the real world, that the show has built something you can always return to because the show refuses to let anything be permanently left behind. We move through the treehouse of horror, bleed the idea that the horror and the comedy share more of the same air than the framing device suggests, that the shadow of Springfield and the warmth of Springfield are both true at the same time, and that living in a place that produces its own horror stories every year without registering them as warnings is its own kind of liminal condition. We sat with Homer's brain damage, the possibility that the comedy of a man who can't stop making the same mistakes is the comedy of someone who was hurt before he had the chance to become whole, and that the imperfect love he offers his family is worth more than the show always gives him credit for, because it is offered by someone working significantly harder than most people realize. We looked at Burns, at the medical conspiracy, at the managed longevity, at the centuries of accumulated power and the lengths to which that power reaches to sustain itself, at the possibility that the man at the top of Springfield's hierarchy sees everyone beneath him not as people but as resources. We followed the water, we noticed what the plant puts into the river and where the river goes, and we sat with the uncomfortable idea that the character we laugh at most in Springfield may be the person most visibly bearing the cost of decisions made long before he was born. We looked at the yellow skin and decided not to accept the branding explanation, to sit instead with the in-universe meaning of a physical marker shared by every human being in one specific town, a marker that says, "We have been here a long time, And this place has changed us. And we don't notice the change anymore because we were inside it before we had any reference point for what the absence of it would feel like. We considered the predictions not as prophecy and not quite as coincidence, but as the product of a brilliantly observant writing staff tracking the currents of a culture and following them to their logical extremes and occasionally arriving at those extremes ahead of schedule. We sat with the slightly stranger version, that the show doesn't predict the future so much as it normalizes the future, that the culture has been shaped by what the show said about it, that the relationship between Springfield and America runs in both directions. We spent a long time with the coma. We followed Homer into the hospital room, and we considered the possibility that the warmth of the show, the way it always comes home, always resolves, always puts the family back together by the end of the episode is not an artistic choice, but a psychological necessity. The compulsion of a dreaming mind that will not let go of the people it loves, that builds the same world over and over with whatever materials it can find, that refuses to wake up, because waking up would mean finding out what 30 years of unconsciousness looks like from the outside. We looked at Burns again, more clearly this time. We traced the full implications of what it would mean for the harm to be policy rather than negligence. We sat with the idea of a population calibrated to be just capable enough to serve a purpose and not quite capable enough to challenge the system that deploys them. And then we arrived at purgatory. We arrived at the possibility that all of these other theories are true simultaneously, and that the thing they all point to the stasis, the repetition, the loop, the questions that keep being asked because they haven't yet been fully answered, is not a flaw in the design of Springfield, but the nature of the design. That Springfield is exactly as it should be. That the family is doing exactly what they need to be doing. That the work of becoming who they are, the work of answering the questions their lives have posed to them, is ongoing and ongoing and ongoing, and the ongoing nature of it is not a failure but a faithfulness. You have spent several hours in Springfield tonight. You have moved through its theories, its mysteries, its strange beauty, and its stranger darkness. You have followed threads that lead to uncomfortable places and then followed them further and found that the uncomfortable places sometimes open into something unexpectedly tender. You have been asked to look at the yellow family in the yellow house in the impossible town and see, beneath the comedy, beneath the cartoon logic, beneath the branding and the nostalgia and the decades of accumulated cultural weight, to see what was always really there. A family trying, a man who loves his family, a woman who holds everything together, a boy who is more than he presents himself as being, a girl who sees everything and cannot stop caring, a baby who has been watching and waiting and saving something for the right moment. That is The Simpsons. That has always been The Simpsons. The theories don't change it. They deepen it. They give it dimensions that the surface-level experience of the show doesn't reveal, but that have always been there, embedded in the structure, waiting for someone who is willing to look carefully enough and long enough to find them. You are at the end of tonight's journey. The light outside is whatever light is outside right now, morning or night, or the ambiguous gray of very late or very early, the light of wherever you are in the world, at whatever hour you happen to be in it. Your body is heavy in whatever way a body gets heavy when it has been still for a long time and the mind has been traveling. The voice in your ear or the text on your screen or whatever form this story has taken as it found you tonight that is ending now. Go to sleep, if you haven't already. Let Springfield settle into the background of your thoughts the way it settles into the background of the culture as a warm light in a familiar window, as the sound of a family through the walls of a house you know well, as the particular comfort of a world you can always find your way back to. The couch is there, the family is gathered, the credits are rolling. Good night from Springfield. Extended explorations. The following passages are deeper dives into each theory, slower, more meditative, written for the quietest hours of the night. Read them in order, or let the voice carry you through them, without tracking the sequence. They are meant to be absorbed rather than followed. Extended exploration. On the nature of return. A deeper look at the floating timeline. There is a thing that happens when you watch a show for long enough. The show becomes a place. Not just a story you follow, not just characters you recognize, but an actual place, a destination with its own geography and its own atmosphere and its own quality of light. You know what it feels like to arrive there. You know the transition from wherever you are, your couch, your bed, the commute, the lunch break, the late night when you can't sleep and you reach for something familiar to the particular space the show occupies. There is a specific opening of the self that happens when you settle in to watch something you have watched many times before. A relaxation of the ordinary guards. A willingness to be somewhere else for a while. The Simpsons, for millions of people across multiple generations, is one of the most reliable versions of this experience in the history of television. And part of what makes it so reliable, part of what makes the destination feel so consistent, so findable, so trustworthy is the floating timeline. Because the floating timeline means that when you go back, it is actually the same. Not similar, not reminiscent the same. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8. The house is the same house. The family is the same family. The comedy is operating in the same register it always operated in, even if the specific episode is new, because the conditions that generate the comedy are permanently preserved. This is different from most stories, and the difference is worth sitting with. Most stories have a direction. They move. They build towards something, toward resolution, toward revelation, toward an ending that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. The pleasure of most stories is partly the pleasure of anticipation, the sense that something is coming, that the pieces being assembled will eventually form a picture, that the investment of attention and emotion will be repaid in the form of arrival. You are going somewhere. The story is taking you somewhere. And when you arrive, when the ending lands, the story becomes permanent in a specific way. It is fixed now, with an ending, with a meaning that its ending has given it. The Simpsons doesn't work like this. It is not going anywhere. The pieces are not assembling toward a picture. There is no ending that is coming, no arrival that will retrospectively define the meaning of everything that preceded it. There is only the continuing, the ongoing, the episodic, the weekly return to a world that is always approximately what it was the last time you visited. And this, the floating timeline theorists argue, is not a limitation of the show. It is its greatest achievement. Because the show has discovered something about the nature of love and family and belonging that most stories, in their insistence on forward motion, miss entirely. What it has discovered is this: the most important things in life do not have endings. The relationship with your family does not resolve into a final meaning when the last episode airs. The love you have for your children is not building toward a conclusion. The marriage that is complicated and deep and sometimes difficult and always fundamental, that marriage doesn't arrive anywhere, doesn't complete itself, doesn't transform into something that can be understood whole. It continues. It is always in the middle of itself. And the middle of a thing is where you actually live. The Simpsons lives in the middle. Every episode is the middle of the story. Every episode is the ongoing present of a family that has not yet arrived anywhere, because they are not going anywhere in the way that most stories are structured to go somewhere. They are just being together in Springfield, in the particular way that this family is together in this town. And that is, when you let it be enough, genuinely enough. The floating timeline is the show's way of honoring the truth that family life is not a journey toward a destination, but a condition you inhabit. You don't grow through your family and leave it behind, changed by the experience. You live inside your family, continuously, and it changes you in ways you only partially recognize. And the changing is not a process with an end point, but a process without one. The kind of change that is ongoing and accumulative, and so embedded in the texture of ordinary life that you rarely experience it as change at all. This is what the town of Springfield knows that most fictional towns don't. It knows that home is not a place you leave to grow, it is a place you return to and return to and return to, and each return is a full experience in itself, not a step towards something else. The pleasure of it is not the pleasure of progress. It is the pleasure of recognition, of finding again what you knew was there, of the warmth of a particular house at a particular time of evening, the smell of it, the sound of the family inside it, the particular texture of the love that lives in that space. I want to tell you something about that texture. The love in the house on Evergreen Terrace is not the love you read about in books that are about love. It is not grand or self-aware or particularly articulate. It does not know its own name most of the time. Homer expresses it by buying the wrong thing for Marge's birthday and then, without being asked, sitting with her through her disappointment rather than fleeing from it. He expresses it by doing something catastrophic to the family's finances, and then working 4 jobs simultaneously without complaint until the damage is repaired. He expresses it by being at the place he is supposed to be even when he would rather be somewhere else, by showing up, by being the person who shows up even when showing up is the hardest thing he knows how to do. It is the love of a limited person who is trying very hard and is not going to stop trying. It is the love that does not transform its object into an ideal, but keeps loving the actual person, the complicated, sometimes exhausting, sometimes infuriating actual person, because the actual person is what's there. Because the actual person is worth loving, even when loving them requires constant work and produces constant difficulty. This love does not change across the seasons. It does not develop or evolve or arrive at wisdom. It is just persistently, stubbornly, exhaustingly present. And the floating timeline preserves that persistence the way amber preserves a thing, caught in it, holds it in exact form, exactly as it is, for as long as you want to look at it. That is what the first theory is really about. Not the mechanics of how the show handles continuity, the meaning of what it is doing. The choice, embedded in the structure of the show from the very beginning, to preserve the love rather than develop it, because a love that can be preserved is, in its way, more valuable than a love that has to keep changing to survive. The changing to survive love is admirable. It is real and it is common, and it is what most of us are working with in our actual lives. But the preserved love, the love caught in amber, the love that you can always find exactly where you left it, that love is the dream, not the settling, not the resignation, not the failure to grow. The dream, the thing you reach for when you want to go back, when you want to return to the place that will not have changed, when you want to find the family still there, still gathered, still present. Springfield keeps the dream alive, because Springfield is the dream. Everything we discuss in this video is, at some level, a way of understanding what it costs to have that dream, and what the dream reveals about the nature of places that function as homes rather than destinations, as returns rather than arrivals. Hold that as we continue. Extended exploration, the architecture of horror, what the treehouse episodes actually are. Horror needs a container. This is one of the oldest observations in the study of storytelling, and it is one of the most consistently useful. The reason that horror, real horror, the kind that reaches into the chest and does something to the heartbeat, requires a container, is that horror without limits is not frightening. It is paralyzing. True, uncontained, unlimited horror does not produce the productive fear that good horror produces, the fear that you can sit inside without being destroyed by it, the fear that gives you something to think about, the fear that passes through you and leaves you slightly changed but still intact. True, uncontained horror produces shutdown. It produces the specific human response to things that are simply too much, the response of turning away, of looking elsewhere, of stopping the intake of the thing because the intake has become unbearable. The treehouse of horror episodes are containers. They are, architecturally, exactly what they announce themselves to be: a house. A treehouse, specifically, which is already a contained, elevated, slightly separate space. A place you go by climbing. A place that is above the ordinary world and slightly apart from it. A place where the rules of the ground-level world are loosened just enough that things can happen there that couldn't happen on the ground. And inside the treehouse, there is a fire. And around the fire, the family tells stories, horror stories. The oldest structure for the oldest human ritual people, gathered around warmth in the dark, making something manageable out of the things that frighten them by giving those things a story shape. The container works in the Halloween specials because the frame is so clear. You know, before the first act has begun, that what you are about to see is the contained version. The specially permitted version. The version that the show has set aside from its normal operations and is offering to you with full acknowledgement of its exceptional status. And in that acknowledgement, in the clear and upfront signaling that this is different, that this is the horror space rather than the comedy space, the show gives you permission to experience things you could not experience if they arrived unexpectedly in the middle of an ordinary episode. Permission to feel the dread. Permission to follow the logic of the horror all the way to its conclusion without the interruption of comedy. But here is what the bleed theory is pointing at, and it is subtle enough that you might miss it if you are not looking. The container is not perfectly sealed. When you go back to the regular episodes with the treehouse vocabulary in your mind, with the specific images and the specific quality of darkness that the Halloween specials employ, you start to notice something. Not everywhere, not obviously, but in certain moments, in certain scenes, in certain episodes that deal with Homer's violence, or Bart's cruelty, or the town's capacity for mob behavior, or the particular darkness that emerges when the show examines what it looks like when things go genuinely wrong. Rather than comedically wrong in those moments, the register is slightly different. It is not the register of comedy, it is not quite the register of the horror specials either. It is something in between a quality of the material that is darker than the comedy but not dark enough to have warranted the container of the treehouse frame. It is the material that leaked. The horror that did not stay in its designated space but found its way, quietly and without announcement, into the ordinary world of the show. Why does this matter? It matters because it suggests that the boundary between the comedy and the horror in The Simpsons is a membrane rather than a wall. It is permeable in both directions. The comedy keeps going in Springfield because the horror is being contained and directed elsewhere, and the horror is possible in the treehouse because the comedy is doing the daily work of keeping the world functional. They need each other. They support each other. The comedy could not sustain itself across 36 seasons without the annual pressure release of the horror specials, and the horror specials would not produce the effect they produce without the contrast of the comedy world they are departing from. But membranes leak. That is the thing about membranes. They are selective, they are regulated, they are designed to allow passage in one direction under certain conditions, and the regulation is not perfect. Things get through that are not supposed to get through. The horror finds its way into the ordinary episodes not because the writers planned it, but because they are drawing from a deep well, and the well contains both the comedy and the horror at the same level. And when you reach into the well, you are not always fully in control of what you bring back up. The moments of bleed are the moments when something came back up that was a little darker than the episode was designed to accommodate. Watch for them. They are brief, and they resolve quickly into comedy again, and the next scene is completely normal. But in the moment, in the specific frame where the tone shifts and something colder moves through the register of the show, you can feel the membrane. You can feel the thing on the other side of it pressing through. You can feel the shadow of Springfield assert itself for just a moment before the comedy pulls the cover back over it. This is not a failure of the show. It is one of the things that makes The Simpsons feel, at its best, like something more than a cartoon. The presence of the shadow, even as a leak, even as an accidental intrusion, gives the comedy a gravity it would not have without it. The love in the house on Evergreen Terrace is warmer because the darkness outside is real. The family's resilience means something because there is something to be resilient against. The comedy is funnier because it is funny in the face of something that is not funny at all. The treehouse of horror episodes are not interruptions of the show. They are its shadow nature making itself temporarily visible. They are the show being honest, once a year, about the full range of the world it has been building. Extended exploration, what it means to love someone you cannot fix Homer's brain, and the problem of imperfect care. Think about the people in your life who you love and who are limited. Not limited in the ordinary way that all people are limited. Not limited in the sense of having imperfect judgment or bad days or characteristic flaws that you have learned to work around. Limited in a more structural way. Limited by something that happened to them, or something they were born with, or something that was done to them before they had the capacity to resist it, something that shapes their behavior in ways they do not always recognize, and that you, loving them, have to continually adjust to. You know that adjustment. You know the specific internal movement it requires. The moment when you see the thing coming, when you recognize the pattern, when you know from long experience that this is a moment where the limitation is going to express itself, and you make the choice every single time. A choice, even when it feels automatic to respond with something softer than what the moment might seem to call for. Because you understand the context. Because you know what is behind the behavior. Because the limitation does not erase the person, and the person is the one you love. And so the limitation becomes part of what you love, in the way that everything that is genuinely part of someone becomes part of what you love about them, if you love them enough and for long enough. Marge Simpson makes this adjustment every episode. This is what the brain damage theory gives you when you apply it to the show's most underappreciated relationship, Homer and Marge are not, in this reading, a conventional comedy couple where one partner is foolish and the other is patient in a comedic way. They are a couple in which one partner has a neurological impairment that is significant and permanent, and the other partner has chosen knowingly, repeatedly, daily to stay and to love and to absorb the cost of the impairment, because the person inside the impairment is worth the cost. Marge knows Homer. She knows him better than he knows himself, because knowing someone requires the kind of consistent, patient, attentive observation that Marge practices constantly, and that Homer, due to the very limitations they are discussing, cannot always reciprocate. She knows the moment before the impulsive decision. She knows the sound of the thought that is about to go wrong. She knows, years before she has any neurological framework for understanding it, that the person she married is working harder than he looks like he is working, that the gap between what he intends and what he achieves is not the gap of someone who doesn't care, but the gap of someone whose caring cannot always find its way to expression. And she stays. She stays not because she has no other options. The show has given her other options, has put her in situations where leaving would have been understandable, would have been reasonable, would have been the choice that an objective observer might have recommended. She stays because she has decided that Homer Simpson is her person. That his specific combination of limitation and love, of damage and devotion, of the ways he fails her, and the ways he comes through for her when she needs him to come through, that this combination is not a burden she is carrying, but a life she is choosing. This is the love that the brain damage theory reveals, not the love of a capable person choosing a capable partner, the love of someone choosing to remain present for someone who is not going to become someone else. Who is going to keep being the specific and difficult person he has always been, the person who was shaped by things that happened before she met him, the person whose limitations are baked into the structure of who he is, rather than being a temporary state he is passing through on his way to becoming better. Most love stories are about people becoming better for the person they love. This love story is about someone loving a person who cannot become better in the specific ways that the story would normally require. And Marge's choice to stay and love and adjust and absorb and return and choose again is, in this reading, a greater act of love than almost anything else the show depicts. Homer's brain damage changes the meaning of his marriage. It doesn't diminish the marriage, it reveals the depth of it. The depth of a love that is not conditional on the loved one being undamaged. The depth of a love that has looked at the full picture, the real picture, and decided that the real picture is the one worth staying for. This is not a comfortable theory. It asks you to love Homer differently than the comedy invites you to love him. It asks you to see his stumbling and his foolishness and his endless capacity for catastrophe, not as entertainment but as reality, as what it actually looks like to live inside a significant limitation and to do your level best. Anyway, and it asks you to see Marge not as the straight man in a comedy double act, but as someone practicing one of the most demanding forms of love there is. The show earns this reading. It earns it in the episodes where the comedy stops for a moment and something truer comes through, where Homer's face does the thing it does when he is fully present, when the brain damage falls away, temporarily, and the person inside it is just looking at his family with something that does not require any interpretation at all. Pure, recognizable human love. Those moments are brief. They have to be brief, because the show is a comedy and the comedy must resume. But they are enough. They are sufficient. They are the thing that the brain damage theory is pointing at when it asks you to look at Homer differently. The limitation is real, the damage is real, and the love behind it and around it and in spite of it, that is real too. Extended exploration. The reckoning of Burns what it actually means to be ancient. There is a specific quality that very old, powerful institutions develop over time. It is not wisdom exactly, though it presents itself as wisdom. It is not experience in the sense that experience is transformative, in the sense that experience changes you, teaches you, requires you to update your understanding of the world as the world itself changes. It is something more static than that and more durable. It is the quality of a thing that has been in place for so long that it no longer remembers why it was put in place, that has outlasted the original rationale for its own existence and is now sustained entirely by its own inertia. Burns has this quality. He is not simply old in the way that old people are old. with the accumulated wisdom and the accumulated damage and the particular combination of clarity and fog that comes from having lived through many decades and absorbed many changes. Burns is old in the way that an institution is old. He is a practice. He is a system. He is a set of relationships and dependencies and arrangements that have been in place for so long that removing them would be, structurally, like removing a load-bearing wall. The building of Springfield would shift in ways it hasn't shifted before, and nobody knows quite what would happen next. This is the deepest reason that Burns is still alive. Not the treatments, not the radiation, not the medical infrastructure. Those things are all real and they are all part of the explanation, but they are not the final answer. The final answer is that Burns is alive because the town of Springfield, which officially despises him, which has every reason to want him gone, which has been harmed by him in ways that are cumulative and severe, and very probably permanent, that town needs him. It needs him in the way that a dependent organism needs its host, not happily, not willingly, but structurally, at a level that is below the level of wanting or choosing. Burns provides the power. Not just the electricity, though. The electricity is real, and it runs the lights and the appliances and the machines of Springfield's daily life. He provides the economic power that organizes the town around his plant, that determines where people work and how much they earn and what choices are available to them. He provides the political power that shapes the local government, that puts the right people in the positions where they can protect his interests, that ensures the mechanisms of accountability remain just inoperable enough to be useful. He provides, in the specific and terrible way that corrupt systems provide, the framework within which ordinary life in Springfield is possible. Take Burns away, and the framework collapses. Springfield's economy is built on the plant. The plant is run by Burns. If Burns dies, what happens to the plant? What happens to the jobs? What happens to the power supply? What happens to the town that has been, for better or for worse, organized around the reality of his existence for longer than most of its residents have been alive? This is the trap that has been built around the town so gradually and so thoroughly that its walls are invisible. Every bar that serves the workers who earn wages from the plant is part of the trap. Every family that depends on those wages is part of the trap. Every local politician whose district depends on the employment the plant provides is part of the trap. Every teacher whose school is funded by the tax revenue the plant generates is part of the trap. The trap is not malicious in the simple sense. Burns did not design it as a trap, not initially, not as his primary intent. He designed it as an empire. He built it to sustain his power and to sustain his life, and to sustain the particular form of existence that someone like Burns, with his appetites and his ambitions and his inability to imagine a world in which he is not the most important thing in it, requires. The trap is a byproduct of the empire. It emerged from the structure he built without being the purpose of that structure. But it functions as a trap regardless of whether it was designed to, and the deepest horror of the Burns medical conspiracy theory, the thing that makes it sit in you uncomfortably after you have considered it, is not what it says about Burns. The deepest horror is what it says about the town, about the specific, recognizable, entirely human way that a community can become organized around the thing that harms it, about the way that economic dependency and social dependency and psychological dependency can all compound each other until the harmful thing becomes, effectively, necessary. Until the harmful thing is the infrastructure. Until the harmful thing is the architecture of daily life. Burns is 104 years old, and he is kept alive by the town that he keeps alive, that keeps him alive. It is a closed system. It has been running for a century. And the only way it stops is if something interrupts the cycle, something from outside the system, something that doesn't have a stake in maintaining the loop, something that can look at the closed circle and recognize it as a circle and be willing to break it. Springfield has never found that thing. Every time someone gets close, every time a gubernatorial candidate makes the contamination a campaign issue, every time a journalist arrives in town to investigate, every time someone with outside credibility and outside resources shows up and starts asking the questions that need to be asked, something happens. The story changes. The focus shifts. The candidate loses. The journalist is reassigned. The someone with the outside perspective discovers that the questions lead somewhere they didn't expect, somewhere with legal implications or political complications or financial entanglements, and the inquiry stalls before it produces anything actionable. This is not the show explicitly depicting a cover-up. This is the show depicting the normal operation of a system that has been designed to sustain itself the way that closed systems always work to maintain their closure, not through dramatic conspiracy but through the grinding, ordinary mechanism of interests aligning. The people who benefit from the system as it exists are the people with the resources to respond to threats to it. The people who are harmed by the system as it exists are the people who have been most thoroughly drained of the capacity to challenge it. The system perpetuates itself through the asymmetry of its effects. Burns at his window, looking down at the town. The town going about its business, looking up at the plant, not seeing Burns. The gap between them, the gap of a century of accumulated power and a century of accumulated depletion, is not the gap between a villain and his victims in the ordinary story sense. It is the gap between a system and the people inside it. And that gap, the theory argues, is what The Simpsons has been drawing for 36 years. Extended exploration, the river that runs through everything on water, memory, and what we choose not to know. There is a particular kind of forgetting that is not really forgetting. It is the kind of not knowing that requires active maintenance, the kind where the knowledge is available, where the three-eyed fish is right there, visible, pulled from the river that everyone in town drinks from, and the not knowing is produced not by an absence of information, but by an agreement not to process what the information means. Springfield has mastered this kind of not knowing. The fish has three eyes. Everyone has seen the fish. The fish has been part of the cultural vocabulary of Springfield for decades. It has been on campaign posters, it has been eaten on television, it has been named and depicted and referenced enough times that it has become a symbol of the town in the way that other towns are symbolized by their architecture or their sports teams. Springfield is the town with the three-eyed fish. It is practically the mascot, and nobody has ever pursued the obvious implication of this to its conclusion. Nobody has ever said, if the fish in our river have three eyes, and if the river runs through our town, and if we drink the river's water, then what does the river contain? And what is it doing to us? And why does the fish have three eyes in the first place? The question is available. The question is obvious. The question is the first question you would ask, and it is the question that nobody in Springfield has ever asked in a way that produced an answer. The water theory is interested in why not? It is interested in the specific mechanism by which an obvious question gets not asked in a community. And what it finds, when it looks carefully, is that the mechanism is not dramatic. It is not a conspiracy of silence enforced by threats. It is something quieter and more structural than that. It is the mechanism of investment. When you have been somewhere for a long time, you have invested in it. You have built your life around the assumption that the place you live is basically livable, that the water you drink is basically drinkable, that the air you breathe is basically breathable, that the environment you inhabit is basically safe enough for the things you are doing in it. These assumptions are not examined because they do not feel like assumptions. They feel like the foundation beneath the assumptions, the ground level of reality on which everything else is built. If the assumption is false, if the water is not basically drinkable, if the environment is not basically safe, then the structure built on top of it is precarious. Everything that was built assuming the foundation was solid has to be reconsidered. Every choice made in the context of that assumption, the house, the job, the children raised in this environment, the community invested in, becomes a choice that was made without full information. And reconsidering choices made without full information is one of the most psychologically difficult things a person can do. So you don't. You maintain the assumption. You file the three-eyed fish under local quirk rather than under evidence of contamination. You absorb the cognitive dissonance of knowing that the water is downstream of the plant and also believing that the water is fine, and you maintain the dissonance rather than resolving it. Because resolving it in the direction the evidence points would require revising your entire relationship to the place you call home. Springfield is not uniquely bad at this. Springfield is exaggeratedly, cartoonishly good at it, good enough that the show can use it as a running joke, can produce the three-eyed fish as a recurring visual gag, can have the safety inspector fall asleep during a meltdown warning, and still have a town full of people who believe the plant is basically fine. The exaggeration is what makes it comedy rather than documentary. But the underlying pattern, the maintenance of comfortable assumptions against the pressure of available evidence, The social agreement to not know the thing that would be too costly to know that pattern is recognizable. It is the pattern of real communities that have made real decisions over real time about what they are willing to see. The water theory asks you to notice that Springfield's version of this pattern has a specific cost. The cost is paid in Homer's crayon, in the three-eyed fish, in the yellow skin and the four fingers and the physical characteristics that differ from the people who arrive in Springfield from outside. The cost is paid in the slow accumulation of a population that is increasingly unable to ask the question that the fish has been asking for decades. Why do we look like this? Where does the water go? What is the plant doing to us? These are the questions that the water carries. They are in the river. They have been in the river for decades. And every time they surface, every time the evidence bubbles up in a way that demands acknowledgement, Springfield applies the mechanism of comfortable investment, and the questions sink again. The river keeps flowing. The questions keep sinking. The plant keeps running. And the family drinks the water every day because they live there, because that is what you do when you live somewhere, because the alternative acknowledging that the water is not safe, that the environment is not safe, that the assumptions on which your entire life is built are not secure, is a kind of catastrophe that the ordinary mind simply cannot afford. Extended exploration. Yellow is a color that has always meant something. Before there was the Simpsons, yellow was a color with a history. It has meant cowardice in some traditions and divinity in others. It is the color of sunlight and the color of caution signals and the color of taxicabs and the color of warning tape. It has been associated with illness in certain medical contexts. Jaundice turns the skin yellow, and the connection between yellow skin and poor health is old and cross-cultural. It has been the color of exclusion in some of the darkest chapters of human history, the color used to mark people as different, as separate, as belonging to a category that the society around them had decided to treat differently. The Simpsons uses yellow for a different, lighter reason, the branding reason, the visibility reason, the choice of a production team trying to make their show immediately recognizable in a competitive landscape. The official explanation is practical and not especially interesting, but the nuclear mutation theory invites you to stay with the color anyway, to notice what it does in context. To notice that a color associated, in human history and human biology, with illness and with sunlight, and with warning, and with the specific kind of visible difference that marks a group as separate, that this color is the skin of every human being in Springfield, and no one outside it. You can see the outsiders from the insiders because the outsiders are a different color. That is a very simple and very old and very uncomfortable piece of information to hold. The mutation theory holds it. It does not shy away from the discomfort of it. It says, the yellow means something. Not literally, not in a way that the show is explicitly deploying as a message, but in the logic of the theory, the yellow means that this population has been visibly altered by its environment in a way that is heritable, that has been passed from parents to children across generations, that is now so thoroughly universal within Springfield that it registers as normal rather than as deviation. To the people inside Springfield, yellow is what people look like. To the people outside Springfield, yellow is what those people look like. That difference between the internal and external perception of a visible characteristic is one of the most fundamental experiences of belonging and otherness, of being inside a category that you didn't choose and that marks you to people who don't share it in ways that can be either meaningless or freighted with meaning, depending on who is doing the looking. The mutation theory asks, what would it mean to know that you look the way you look because of something that was done to you? Not because of anything you chose, not because of anything you inherited in the normal genetic sense, but because of a decision made by an industry about how to run its facility, about how much it was willing to spend on containment, about how important the health of the surrounding community was compared to the profitability of the operation. What would it mean to be yellow because the plant made you yellow? Springfield never asks this question because the people of Springfield cannot see their own color. It is the color of their world. It is the color that everything has always been. The question requires a perspective that can only come from outside, from someone arriving in Springfield who is not yellow, who sees the yellow, who notices it as a thing that requires explanation, rather than accepting it as the baseline. Lisa comes closest, sometimes. Lisa is the one who looks at Springfield with something approaching an external perspective, who has read enough and thought enough and cared enough about the truth of things to be able to notice the things that the rest of Springfield has normalized. But even Lisa can't quite see the yellow. She was born into it. It is her own face in the mirror. That is the mutation theory's darkest observation. The evidence of what is happening to you is written on your own body. But your own body is the last place you can see clearly. You see yourself through the eyes of people who share your condition, and in their eyes, your condition is normal because they share it. Springfield is full of people who can see the three-eyed fish and not connect it to their own skin. And the connection is there. It has always been there. It runs through the water and through the biology and through the generations. But seeing it would require standing outside yourself. And nobody, not even in Springfield, can do that. Extended exploration. What it feels like when the show knows something on satire, pattern, and the speed of the future. Good satire is uncomfortable in a specific way. It is uncomfortable not because it says something false, but because it says something true that you were in the process of not quite saying to yourself. It articulates the thing you were dancing around. It makes legible what you were keeping pleasantly ambiguous. And the discomfort of it, the specific quality of it that makes you laugh and then makes you stop laughing slightly, is the discomfort of recognition. Of having the half-formed thought completed for you, by someone else, out loud in public. The Simpsons has been doing this for 36 years. It has been completing sentences that American culture was half-forming about itself, and it has been doing so with enough precision that when the sentences it completed turned out to correspond to actual events, when the half-formed thought turned out to be fully realized reality, the sensation was uniquely strange, not just the normal strange of coincidence. Something more intimate. Something that felt like the show had been in the room with you during the half-forming, listening, taking notes. The predictive programming theory is, in its most straightforward version, simply an analysis of this sensation. An attempt to understand what produces it, what it consists of, what it says about the relationship between a piece of very attentive popular culture and the culture it is attending to. The most interesting version of the explanation, the one that goes beyond smart writers making educated guesses, has to do with the feedback loop between popular culture and reality. A culture does not simply produce art that reflects it. It produces art that shapes what it will become. The art and the culture are in dialogue with each other, continuously, and the dialogue runs in both directions. Springfield has been part of the American cultural conversation for as long as most American adults can remember. The jokes it tells, the images it produces, the situations it depicts, all of these become part of the shared vocabulary through which Americans understand and discuss and relate to their own experience. And when that vocabulary includes, say, the image of a wealthy political outsider descending an escalator to announce a presidential campaign, that image is now in the vocabulary. It is available. It has been absorbed. And when years later something happens that activates that image, the image is already there, already prepared, already part of how the culture understands the kind of thing that is happening. The show didn't predict the event. The show contributed to the cultural framework within which the event became, in some sense, imaginable. The event, when it arrived, was not completely unprecedented because the vocabulary for it already existed, and Springfield had been part of building that vocabulary. This is the version of the predictive programming theory that doesn't require any supernatural claim. It requires only the recognition that popular culture is not a passive reflection of the world. It is an active participant in the production of the world's meaning. The stories a culture tells about itself shape what the culture is capable of experiencing and imagining and ultimately doing. Springfield has been one of the most influential contributors to American cultural self-understanding for decades. Of course, the things it imagined have influenced the things that happened. Of course, there is a feedback loop. Of course, the predictions feel less like predictions and more like self-fulfilling portraits when you look at them long enough. And the reason this matters, the reason it rises to a danger level of 7 rather than remaining at a comfortable lower number, is what it implies about the show's current output. If the early seasons of The Simpsons contained images and ideas that subsequently became real, and if the mechanism for that is the one described above, the cultural vocabulary building mechanism, the shared imagination being prepared for certain kinds of futures, then the current and recent seasons of the show are doing that work right now. They are, in this very moment, building vocabulary for futures that have not yet arrived. What are they building vocabulary for? The show has depicted in recent seasons levels of political dysfunction and institutional collapse and economic inequality that its early seasons depicted, but in a more satirical, more distant, more obviously comedic register. The more recent material deals with these subjects in a tone that is darker and less comfortable. The satire has sharpened because the distance between Springfield and the actual world has narrowed. If the early Springfield was a warning, and the predictions suggest it was, at minimum, an accurate map of where things were heading, then the current Springfield is a different kind of document. It is closer to a real-time account than a speculative one. The distance that allowed the satire to be funny, that put the discomfort at a manageable remove, has been closing. And when it closes completely, when Springfield and the actual world are the same distance apart as any two towns that happen to share the same name, the show will have become something its creators never quite intended it to be. A documentary, extended exploration, the shape of a dream on what the coma gives Homer that waking life cannot. Dreams are not random. This is one of the things that the study of dreaming has consistently found across different theoretical traditions and different empirical approaches. Dreams are not noise. They are not the brain going offline and producing whatever arbitrary content results from the random firing of neurons during rest. Dreams are organized. They have themes. They return to the same material again and again, approaching it from different angles, testing different responses to it, constructing scenarios that allow the dreaming mind to rehearse and process, and sometimes begin to resolve the things that the waking mind cannot fully face. Dreams are problem-solving, incomplete, imperfect, non-linear problem-solving, but purposive, directed, aimed at something. If Homer has been dreaming since April of 1993, then his dream has a purpose, and the purpose is visible in the structure of the show if you look for it. Every episode is a scenario. Every scenario poses a problem, a threat to the family, a test of Homer's love, a situation that requires him to navigate the gap between who he is and who he wants to be, and every episode resolves. Not cleanly, not perfectly, not in a way that would hold up to sustained scrutiny, but in a way that restores the fundamental arrangement, the family together, the love intact, the house still standing, the relationship still functional despite everything. The dream keeps posing the problem because the problem isn't solved yet. But the dream keeps resolving it not to completion but to adequacy, to good enough, to the family is still there, because that is the minimum condition the dreamer requires. The dream cannot give Homer the resolution that would release him from the need to keep dreaming. It can only give him the ongoing, renewable adequacy that keeps him going. That gives him a reason to keep dreaming rather than stopping. The reason to keep dreaming is the family. Every dream scenario is, at its core, about whether the family will remain intact, whether Homer's love, expressed imperfectly through the specific kind of imperfect person he is sufficient to hold the family together. Whether Marge will still be there at the end, whether the kids will still be his kids in the way that matters, still connected, still loving, still choosing him despite everything, whether the house will still be home. And the dream answers yes, every time. Not without struggle. Not without the episode first staging the possibility that the answer might be no, that this time the mistake will be too large, the failure too complete, the harm too difficult to forgive. The dream makes Homer earn the yes. It puts the family at risk, it puts the marriage at risk, it tests the love against circumstances that would challenge it. And then, at the end of the episode, the yes comes through. The family is still there. He still has them. The dream's purpose is not to resolve the problem. Its purpose is to keep the yes coming, to keep producing, episode after episode, season after season, decade after decade. The experience of arriving back at the thing he loves most and finding it still intact. This is what a mind in a coma needs. Not resolution, not arrival, just the ongoing, renewable confirmation that the thing worth being conscious for is still there. This is also, incidentally, what the audience needs. This is why the show keeps going. This is why 36 seasons are not too many, why the returns do not diminish, why the same family in the same house doing approximately the same things still produces something in the viewer that feels worthwhile. Because the family's still there, the love still intact, the couch still warm is a thing that can be offered over and over without losing its meaning. because its meaning is not in the novelty of it. Its meaning is in the reliability of it. Homer's dream is also our dream. The unconscious mind in the hospital bed in Springfield General is also the viewer settling into the couch on a Sunday night, reaching for the same familiar world, needing the same confirmation that it is still there, that the family is still together, that home is still home. We are all, in some sense, dreaming alongside Homer. We are all in the hospital room, and the dream keeps us here because none of us wants to wake up and find out what the show ends. Extended exploration. The geography of control. How a man owns a town without owning a deed to it. Property is the obvious form of ownership. You own the land and the building and the air rights above it, and you can do what you want with it within the limits of law, and you can prevent others from doing what they want with it, and you can pass it to your children when you die, or sell it to someone else while you live. This is the ownership that is written in registers and enforced by courts, and that most people, when they think about the relationship between wealth and power, have in mind. Burns has this kind of ownership. He owns the nuclear plant, the mansion, presumably significant amounts of the surrounding land, various corporate entities that represent his other interests. The material, registerable, court-enforced version of his ownership is real and substantial and easily documented. But the theory about Burns's deliberate management of Springfield's population is not primarily about his property ownership. It is about a different, less legible form of ownership, the ownership that comes from being so thoroughly embedded in the economic and social life of a community that your presence is no longer optional. The ownership that comes from being necessary. When you are necessary, you don't need to own deeds. The deed is the relationship of dependency itself. The deed is the fact that the town's lights run on your power, and the town's workers earn their wages at your facility, and the town's government is funded by the taxes your operations generate. The deed is the web of invisible connections that links every household in Springfield to the continued operation of the plant, and therefore to the continued presence of the man who runs it. Burns does not need to threaten Springfield. He does not need to hold anything over anyone's head explicitly or make his control visible in any dramatic way. He does not need to be the villain of a confrontation. He simply needs to continue existing, to continue operating, to continue being the center of the economic gravity around which the town's life organizes itself. His control is structural. It is the control that requires no enforcement because it is built into the infrastructure. This is the kind of control that is hardest to challenge, the kind of control that feels like circumstances rather than like power, the kind where you cannot point to the person who made the decision that affects you because the decision was not made recently, it was made decades ago, through a series of incremental arrangements, and the person who made it has become so woven into the fabric of the place that challenging their control would mean challenging the fabric itself. Springfield cannot challenge Burns because Springfield is, in a structural sense, Burns. The town that exists is the town that grew up around his plant. The roads and the schools and the businesses and the social life of the community are all organized around the gravity of that central facility. Remove the facility and you do not have Springfield without Burns. You have a different place entirely. A smaller place, a less organized place. A place that would have to discover who it is without the organizing principle that has been at its center for generations. The horror of the management theory is not that Burns is a monster. Burns as monster is easy to deal with. You organize against the monster, you expose the monster, you remove the monster, and then you move on. The horror is that Burns has made himself into the infrastructure, and you cannot organize against the infrastructure without dismantling the place you live. This is what Homer, in his brain-damaged state, has somehow arrived at intuitively if not intellectually. This is why he keeps going to work, not because he has been threatened, not because he has been tricked, because on some deep precognitive level, he understands that his family's life is organized around the plant, that the plant is organized around Burns, and that the alternative to compliance is a structural void that no one in Springfield, himself included, has any idea how to fill. He strangles his son on the couch. He goes to work in the morning. He doesn't connect the dots, but the dots, on some level, connect themselves through him. The accumulated weight of 30 years in Sector 7G, the paycheck that keeps the mortgage current, the specific shape of a life that was already shaped before he arrived in it, all of that is doing the connecting that his mind cannot do directly. Homer knows, without knowing that he knows, that you cannot fight the infrastructure. Springfield knows it too. The whole town knows it. In the same way, not as articulated knowledge, not as a position that could be stated and defended, but as the deep operating assumption beneath all the other assumptions. Burns exists. The plant exists. The town exists because the plant exists. And the town will continue to exist only as long as the plant continues to exist. That is the deed. Not paper, not courts. The irreplaceable centrality of a single old man in the life of everyone who lives in the field of his influence. He is not their owner, he is their gravity. Extended exploration. The sacred town on purgatory, love, and why Springfield cannot end. Here is a question that is worth sitting with in the quietest part of the night. What would it take for The Simpsons to end? Not canceled, not the network deciding that the ratings have fallen to the point where the production cost no longer makes economic sense, not the voice actors deciding they are done, not the creative team running out of ideas. What would it take for the show to end in the way that a story ends? Because the story has found its conclusion, because the questions have been answered, because the beings at the center of it have arrived at the place they were traveling toward all along and the traveling is done? The answer, if you take the purgatory theory seriously, is simultaneously very simple and completely overwhelming. The show would end when Homer understands. Not when Homer learns something he has learned things before and forgotten them. Not when Homer achieves something he has achieved things before and had them taken away. Not when Homer becomes a better version of himself. Because the better versions have come and gone without leaving permanent marks. When Homer understands, when the understanding is of the kind that cannot be unforgotten, that changes the structure of the thing rather than just adding information to it, that arrives with enough force and enough clarity to close the gap between who Homer is and who his love for his family requires him to be. That understanding is the thing that the show has been approaching for 36 years without quite arriving at. Every episode is a step in its direction. Every act of trying, every imperfect expression of love, every moment of returning to the family after failing them, every time Homer chooses the couch rather than the bar, the family rather than the escape, the difficulty of real love rather than the easier comfort of not being responsible for anyone, every one of these is a step toward the understanding, but it hasn't landed yet. The understanding hasn't arrived in the form that would constitute its arrival. And so the loop continues. And so Springfield continues. The purgatory theory is asking you to see the loop not as stagnation but as approach. The family is not stuck. They are moving towards something, in the specific way that difficult, deeply important movements happen, not in straight lines, not through obvious progress, but through the accumulation of approaches and withdrawals, the repetition of the same territory from slightly different positions, the incremental wearing away of the thing that is preventing the arrival. What is preventing the arrival? For Homer, it is the gap between his love and his capacity to act on it. The love is not in question. It has never been in question. Not for 36 years, not for a single episode. What is in question is whether the love is sufficient on its own, whether loving fiercely and imperfectly and persistently is enough, whether the arrival requires not just the love but the capability to express it in the forms that his family needs from him specifically. The purgatory is the space between the love and the expression. The town of Springfield is built in that space. It is the specific geography of that specific gap, the terrain that a man has to cross repeatedly in different weather and under different circumstances and from slightly different starting positions in order to arrive at the other side of the gap. At the place where the love and its expression are finally the same distance from each other, he hasn't crossed it yet. He keeps trying. He keeps failing and returning and trying again. And the show keeps going, because the show is the trying. The show is not about the arrival. The show is about the crossing, the ongoing, sustained, episode-by-episode attempt to close the gap between what you feel and what you can manage to express, between who you love and who you are capable of being for them. Every family is this. Every family is in some version of this gap. Every household has its own version of the thing that keeps being tried and keeps falling short and keeps being tried again because the trying is the love. The trying is all the love anyone ever actually has, and the stopping would be the thing that actually failed. Springfield cannot end because the trying cannot end. The trying is what families do. The trying is what love is, when love is not a feeling but a practice. When love is not the emotion you have in the good moments but the choice you make in the difficult ones. When love is not what happens when everything is easy, but what you reach for when everything is hard, and you can't quite reach it and you try again anyway, the town will stand as long as the family keeps trying. And they will keep trying as long as the show keeps running. And the show will keep running as long as there are people who need to see that the trying counts, who need to be reminded, once a week, that imperfect love persistently practiced is real love, is worth having, is worth watching. This is what the purgatory is for. Not punishment, not waiting, not the suspended state of someone who has failed and is paying for it. The purgatory of Springfield is the space of ongoing practice, the sacred space that exists specifically to hold the trying, to give it room, to ensure that it can continue without the pressure of consequences that would be permanently damaging. In the real world, the trying takes place under conditions of genuine irreversibility. The real world has permanent consequences. The child you fail to show up for grows up and carries the absence. The marriage you neglect reaches the point of no return. The year when you were distracted and absent and half present is not replaced by a better year. It was that year, and the people who lived it alongside you experienced it as it was. The real world does not provide the reset that Springfield provides. Springfield provides the reset because the real world cannot. This is the gift of the fictional world to the people who live in it and the people who visit it. The space to try again. The removal of the stakes that make the trying too difficult in reality. The environment in which love can be practiced without the cost of mistakes being final, where the learning can accumulate even when the lessons don't stick, where the approach toward understanding can continue past the point where real-world conditions would have ended the story. The purgatory theory says this is not make-believe. This is what purgatory is. This is what the in-between space exists to provide. Not the removal of difficulty. Springfield is full of difficulty, but the provision of the specific condition under which difficulty can be navigated towards something. The condition of ongoing time. Time that keeps being provided. Time that doesn't run out before the work is done. Homer has all the time he needs. The dream gives it to him. The purgatory gives it to him. Springfield gives it to him. And he keeps using it. Episode after episode, season after season, decade after decade, he keeps using it. He keeps trying. He keeps failing and returning and trying again. He keeps choosing the family, and the family keeps being there. Extended exploration. Lisa's question, the one that has no answer yet. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She has played her saxophone in the same bedroom, in the same house, in the same town for 36 years. She has read the same books and tried the same causes and failed the same battles and stood up from the same failures and tried again for 36 years, without stopping, without giving up, without becoming the version of herself that would be easier to be the version that accepts the limits of Springfield as the limits of the world, that puts down the saxophone, that stops asking the question that never gets a satisfying answer. The question is it possible to stay whole in a world that doesn't want you whole? Lisa's world, Springfield, the family, the school, the culture wants her in pieces. It wants the parts of her that are useful and comfortable and not too challenging. It wants the occasional brilliant insight that makes her interesting, but not the sustained intellectual engagement that makes her demanding. It wants her love and her warmth and her passion, but not directed at targets that are inconvenient. It wants Lisa, but a smaller Lisa, a Lisa who has accepted the ceiling and stopped pushing against it. And Lisa keeps refusing. She keeps being full-sized in a world that is designed for people who have agreed to be smaller. She keeps insisting on the full version of herself, the person who cares about everything, who cannot separate her intelligence from her emotion, who takes the world seriously in a way that the world consistently punishes her for taking it seriously. She keeps doing this year after year, episode after episode, season after season, without the accumulation of her failures producing the collapse that the persistence of difficulty would normally produce. In the purgatory theory, this is the point. Lisa's stubbornness, her refusal to diminish herself, her ongoing practice of being fully herself in a world that doesn't want her fully, is the spiritual work she is here to do. The purgatory is providing her with the conditions to practice it, to keep encountering the resistance, to keep choosing not to collapse in the face of the resistance, to keep arriving, through the practicing of this, at something she couldn't have arrived at without the practicing. What she is arriving at is the thing she doesn't yet know. that the world beyond Springfield, the world she keeps believing is out there, the world that would value her for what she is also full of ceilings. That the resistance is not specific to Springfield but is a feature of the world generally, the world that is always more comfortable with smaller versions of its most difficult inhabitants. That the answer to her question, is it possible to stay whole in a world that doesn't want you whole, is not yes if you can get out of Springfield. The answer, if it is yes everywhere. Or it is not yes at all. She has to find the answer where she is. Not because Springfield is where answers come from, but because the question is not about Springfield. The question is about Lisa, about whether she is capable of being what she is, fully, in conditions of ongoing resistance, about whether the persistence of difficulty diminishes her or whether she is the kind of person that the difficulty makes more rather than less. 36 years of episodes suggest she is the latter. 36 years of Lisa choosing to stay full, to stay present, to stay engaged, suggests that she has what the question requires. But the question hasn't been answered in the final, resolved sense. Not because she hasn't earned the answer, because the answer to a question about endurance is the endurance itself. There is no conclusion to it. There is only the ongoing practice of it. And when she finally arrives at the certainty that the fullness of herself is not something she needs the world's permission to maintain, when she knows this not as an intellectual proposition but as a lived experience, as something that has been tested and survived testing so many times that the test no longer has power over her, then she will be done with Springfield. But she is not done yet. The question is still being asked. The practice is still ongoing. And every episode in which Lisa chooses to remain fully herself in a world that would prefer her smaller is another episode in which the practice deepens. She keeps playing. The saxophone keeps going. The question keeps being asked and partially answered and asked again in a slightly different form. That is Lisa's purgatory. That is the work she is here to do. Extended exploration. Maggie's silence and the wisdom of waiting. Of all the theories we explore tonight, the one about Maggie is the one that feels most like a held breath. There is something about Maggie that the show has always handled with a particular kind of care. She is the least explained of the Simpsons. She is the one about whom the show has made the fewest claims, delivered the least exposition, provided the least context. She is the baby. She sucks her pacifier and she falls down when she tries to walk, and she watches things with those enormous round eyes that seem to contain, in different episodes and different moments, anything from total blankness to complete comprehension. The show cannot decide what Maggie is, and this, the theorists argue, is not an oversight, it is a decision. In the Purgatory reading, Maggie is the Simpson who is furthest from resolution, the one whose question has not yet found its shape. Homer's question is about imperfect love. Marge's question is about the value of staying. Bart's question is about performance and selfhood. Lisa's question is about wholeness and resistance. These questions have been articulated, explored, partially answered, and partially reopened across decades of episodes. They have form, they have history. Maggie's question is still gathering itself. She is the youngest. And in the Purgatory, the youngest is also the newest, the one who has been here for the least time, who has had the fewest episodes to work through the question, whose work is therefore the most preliminary and the most open. She is watching. She is absorbing. She is doing the preparatory work of someone who has not yet discovered what she is here to do. The silence is the preparatory silence. The quiet before the question forms itself clearly enough to be asked. The held breath before the words. She will speak. She will have her second word, and her third, and eventually she will find the words for whatever it is she has been holding behind the pacifier for 36 years. But the time has not come yet, and she knows this. Whatever level of intelligence she operates at, and the evidence across the series suggests it is extraordinary, she has arrived at the wisdom of knowing when to wait. Waiting is not passive. Waiting is a practice. Waiting well with full attention, with genuine openness, without collapsing the waiting into premature action, is one of the most demanding things a person can do. Most people cannot sustain waiting. They fill the silence because silence is uncomfortable. They make their move before the moment is right because the patience of real waiting exceeds what they can maintain. They speak before they know what they are saying because the alternative, the patient silence of not yet knowing, is too difficult. Maggie waits. She waits while Homer blunders and Marge holds things together, and Bart provokes and Lisa argues, and the town does all the things that the town does. She waits through the catastrophes and the resolutions and the resets and the beginning agains. She waits through the celebrity encounters and the space travel and the coma and the radiation and all the theories. She waits with her pacifier and her enormous eyes and her complete attentive presence. And in that waiting, something is being prepared that none of the rest of them have yet arrived at. Something that the theory does not name directly because the show does not name it directly. Something that Maggie knows that she has always known, that she was perhaps born knowing in whatever sense one is born, knowing in purgatory, and that she has decided to hold until the moment is right. The moment is not yet right, but it is coming. The way all moments that have been patiently held come not suddenly, not with dramatic announcement, but with the quiet, irresistible inevitability of a season changing. One day the light will be slightly different, and Maggie will feel the change, and she will know that the waiting is done, and then she will speak. And whatever she says will be the thing that the show has been building toward since the very first episode. The thing that was always at the center of the family, always present in the spaces between the other characters' words, always there in the one who didn't speak. The show cannot tell you what she says. The show doesn't know yet. She doesn't know yet. It is the thing that is being prepared in the silence, and the silence has to be complete before the preparation is done. But something is there. Something real and important, and specifically Maggie's. Something that has been watching and waiting and gathering itself for 36 years. When it speaks, we will all understand what Springfield was for. Appendix. Further reflections. For the very late hours. These passages are for the ones who are still awake, the ones who cannot quite let go. Read them slowly, or read them not at all. They are here for whenever you need them. On Ned Flanders and the Weight of Goodness, there is a character in Springfield who is, by every visible measure, a better person than the main character of the show. He is kind. He is patient. He is generous to a degree that would be, in a realistic portrayal of human behavior, implausible, not the occasional generosity of someone who gives when giving is easy, but the sustained, practiced, daily generosity of someone who has made giving a structural part of who they are. He is devoutly religious in a way the show has always treated, with a combination of gentle mockery and genuine respect. He is a good father. He is a good neighbor. He takes care of his house and his children and his community in ways that Homer Simpson, by comparison, almost never manages. His name is Ned Flanders, and the show treats him with a particular kind of cruelty that is all the more devastating for being so consistently accidental. Ned's wife was killed by Homer's selfishness. A t-shirt cannon at a racetrack misfired because Homer was dodging the incoming shirts, and the shirts hit Maud Flanders instead, and she fell from the bleachers, and she died. Homer's specific inability to think about the effect of his actions on other people, the frontal lobe damage, the radiation, the crayon, whichever explanation you prefer, cost Ned the person he loved most. And Ned forgave him, not because the forgiveness was easy, because the psychological conditioning that was installed in Ned when he was a child, the behavioral modification that suppressed the rage that naturally exists in every human being and replaced it with compulsive niceness, left him constitutionally incapable of sustaining anger. He forgave because his brain would not allow him to do otherwise. This is the most quietly terrible thing about Ned Flanders. His goodness is not free. It was not chosen from a position of abundance, from a surfeit of natural kindness that simply found its expression in generous behavior. It was engineered. It was installed by a psychiatrist who saw an uncontrollable child and decided that the solution was to remove the uncontrollability by removing the capacity for anger. And what was left after the anger was removed, what the treatment produced was Ned, patient, generous, forgiving Ned, the man Springfield credits as its moral center, the man who does everything right, the man who has no choice but to do everything right, because the alternative was taken from him before he understood what was being taken. What would Ned be if he were capable of anger? What would Ned be if the conditioning had never happened? If his parents had found some other way to manage his childhood, if the psychiatrist had not applied the specific treatment that transformed his rage into performance? He would be someone different, possibly someone worse, possibly someone more difficult to live next to, more volatile, more capable of the kind of confrontation that the real injuries in his life deserved. But he would also be freer. He would be choosing his goodness rather than enacting it. The distinction matters enormously. A goodness that is chosen, that is practiced in the face of the alternative, that emerges from someone who is capable of other things and selects this, is a different quality of goodness from one that is compelled. It is more genuinely admirable, in a certain sense, because it required something, because the person who practices it could have done otherwise and decided not to. Ned cannot decide not to. His decision was made for him by a man he barely knew when he was too young to understand what was happening. The show knows this. It has depicted it. And it has shown you the result of it, a man who gives and gives and gives, who forgives and forgives and forgives, who returns to the church every Sunday with a faith that remains unbroken despite the evidence the show has provided that God, in Springfield, talks to Homer, and not to Ned. God talks to Homer. Homer, who falls asleep in church, who uses religion as a convenient framework when it serves him and ignores it when it doesn't, who has never in 36 seasons demonstrated the sustained spiritual practice that Ned has made the center of his life. God shows up in Homer's dreams and offers philosophical guidance and gives Homer the kind of direct, personal, divine attention that Ned, who prays earnestly every day of his life, has never been shown receiving. This is not an accident. The show is making a point about the relationship between sincerity and recognition, between genuine religious practice and the kind of haphazard, self-serving engagement with the divine that Homer represents. The point is unflattering to the universe. The point is that the universe is not organized around the reward of sincere goodness, that the man who tries hard and does right does not receive special dispensation, that the man who stumbles through life with a good heart and a broken brain gets the God conversation, and the man who has ordered his entire existence around his relationship with God gets silence. Springfield is the town where this is true, where the good man gets punished and the bad man gets by, and the universe is indifferent to the difference. This is one of the things that makes Springfield feel so true, even as a cartoon, because the universe of actual human experience is also frequently organized this way. The good people get punished. The bad people get by. The hard workers lose their jobs, and the people who coast keep theirs. The devoted parents have the difficult children, and the careless parents have the easy ones. The universe, as a general matter, does not organize itself around the reward of virtue. Springfield is honest about this in a way that most stories are not. Most stories, including most comedies, at least gesture toward a justice mechanism. The bad guys get their comeuppance. The good guys get their reward. The universe, in the story's ending, reveals itself to have been paying attention to who deserved what and to have arranged things accordingly. Springfield's universe doesn't do this. Springfield's universe looks at Ned Flanders and at Homer Simpson and distributes its favors according to some logic that has nothing to do with which of them is trying harder or being better or loving more sincerely. And this, more than the three-eyed fish or the floating timeline or any of the theories, might be the show's most honest observation about the nature of the world it was made in and for. On Hans Moleman and the Permanence of Small Things, there is a man in Springfield who has died many times. You have seen him. You have watched him get hit by cars and crushed by objects and buried and eaten and set on fire and drowned and demolished in an almost infinite variety of ways across the seasons. And then you have seen him in the next episode, unchanged, unaffected, present in the background of some completely unrelated scene, as if the previous episode's death had simply not occurred. His name is Hans Moleman. He is very small and very old and very nearly blind. He has once stated his age as 31, which would make him the most prematurely aged person in a town full of people whose bodies do not behave as they should. He exists primarily to suffer, and he suffers primarily in the background, in the margins, in the spaces where the main story is not happening. Hans Moleman is the show's most extreme version of what Springfield is, because if the floating timeline and the reset mechanism and the collective agreement to forget what happened are all real features of Springfield's operation, then they are most visible in Moleman. He is the character for whom the reset is most dramatic, who dies literally, repeatedly, within the space of canonical regular episodes, and is restored to life by the same mechanism that restores the town's buildings and heals the relationships and returns everyone to their starting positions. Moleman is the proof of concept, the demonstration that death in Springfield is, under certain conditions, provisional. But what is Moleman doing there? What is he working out in Springfield? What question is being posed to him in each episode through the specific manner of his death and the specific circumstances of his latest humiliation? The theories are quiet on this. The theories don't have much to say about Moleman because Moleman doesn't fit cleanly into any of them. He is not connected to Burns in any meaningful way. He is not part of the family. He is not a figure of satire in the same register as the major characters. He is just there, present, suffering, returning. Perhaps that is his function. Perhaps Moleman is Springfield's reminder that the reset is not only available to the central characters, not only operative for the story that the show is trying to tell. It extends into the background. It covers the margins. Even the small and suffering and barely noticed have the protection of the place's rules. Even Hans Moleman cannot be permanently lost. This is, in a strange way, the most comforting thing about Springfield, the most generous thing about the world the show has built. Not just the main characters, not just the family that is the center of the story, not just the named and significant and thematically important residents, but everyone. Even the very small ones who are only there to get hit by cars. Even the barely noticed, the marginally present, the people in the background whose function is almost entirely comedic. Springfield holds them too. The reset covers them too. Moleman dies and comes back because the place is generous enough to hold even the ones it treats most casually. Even the characters the show uses as props have the protection of the world they live in. There is something about this that I have never quite been able to put into a form that satisfies me. Something about what it says about the nature of a place that is generous enough to include the very small and the suffering in its protection. That extends its impossible mercy even to the people who don't seem to need mercy as much as they need to just not be hit by another car. Maybe that is it. Maybe that is the thing. A place that doesn't abandon even its most marginal inhabitants. A place where even the smallest and most ignored and most repeatedly punished can trust that they will be there in the next scene, intact, ready for whatever comes next. A place that has no permanent casualties among the people who belong to it. That sounds like a very specific definition of a good place. Springfield is full of terrible things. The water is contaminated. The plant is poisoning the population. The billionaire is managing his empire through the biology of the people he employs. The characters are stuck in a loop that prevents them from growing. The horror leaks in from the specials. The timeline floats in a way that prevents real accumulation. And yet Moleman keeps coming back. And the family keeps finding their way to the couch. And the love keeps being real even when the expression of it keeps failing. And the saxophone keeps playing. And the baby keeps watching. Springfield is terrible in the specific ways we have discussed tonight. And it is good in a way that is hard to articulate precisely, but that you recognize the moment you feel it, a warmth that is not naive, not blind to the terrible things, but present alongside them, insisting on itself alongside them, refusing to be extinguished by them. That warmth is the show's deepest argument. Not a theory, an argument. That warmth says, even here, even in the contaminated water and the floating time and the coma and the managed population and all the rest, even here, love is happening. Real, imperfect, exhausting, renewable love. And it matters. It matters as much as all the terrible things, maybe more. Maybe, the warmth suggests, it matters most. A final reflection. What you carry out of Springfield. You have traveled far tonight. You began in the early evening of the show's history, standing back and watching the timeline float, noticing the gentle impossibility of a family that doesn't age, feeling the first faint tug of the mystery. And from there you moved inward and inward and inward into the horror at the edges of the comedy, into the crayon in Homer's brain, into the centuries of Burns's managed longevity, into the contaminated water, into the mutation visible in the yellow of every face in town. You considered what it means that the show has been predicting futures. You followed Homer into the coma and stayed with him for a while, in the dream where his family is always there, always young, always on the couch when he needs them to be. You looked at the full shape of what Burns has built and let yourself feel the weight of it. And then you climbed all the way to the top of the pile of theories and found yourself looking at Springfield from the angle that makes it a sacred space, the purgatory, the between place, the location of the ongoing trying. What do you carry out of all of this? Not the theories. The theories are interesting, and some of them are more interesting than others, And a few of them are the kind of interesting that stays with you for years and surfaces unexpectedly. When you watch an episode you've seen 50 times and suddenly see it differently. But the theories are the frame, not the picture. The picture is the family. That is what is always in the center of all of this. No matter how far the theories range from it, no matter how dark or how strange or how structurally elaborate the ideas become, the family is what you return to. The family is the thing that all of these theories are trying to explain, or to protect, or to threaten, or to honor. Every theory starts and ends with the people on the couch. Homer, who loves his family with an imperfect, damaged, exhausting, irreplaceable love. Marge, who holds the family with a patience that is not passivity but choice repeated, daily, ongoing choice. Bart, who cares more than he will admit, who is more than he seems, who keeps finding his way back to the people who know him best. Lisa, who refuses to stop asking, who insists on her whole self in a world that prefers her smaller, who plays the saxophone every night in her room and believes in a version of the world that doesn't fully exist yet. Maggie, who watches everything and knows more than anyone and is waiting with extraordinary patience, with extraordinary faith for the moment that is coming. These 5 people, this family, this house on Evergreen Terrace in this impossible town, you know them. You have known them for as long as you have known anyone who lives in a television. They were there when you were young, and they were there when you got older, and they were there through whatever things happened in your life in between, always exactly as you left them, always ready to receive you back when you needed to go somewhere familiar. That is the gift, not the theories. The gift is the consistency, the fact that the place is always there, always open, always the same temperature, always with the same people in the same arrangement, ready to do again the things that they do, ready to tell again the stories that they tell, ready to love each other again in the specific and recognizable and irreplaceable way that this family loves each other. Take that home tonight. Carry it with you into sleep. The family is on the couch, the beer is cold, the saxophone is playing somewhere in the back of the house. And Homer, for this one moment, is looking at his family with that expression, the expression that only he makes, the one that is half surprised and half overwhelmed and entirely, helplessly, completely devoted. And the moment is perfect in the way that small, ordinary moments are perfect when you are paying attention to them. He doesn't say anything. He doesn't need to. You know what he means. Springfield has always known what he means. And that has always been enough. Good night. End of script. Additional night passages for the sleepless. If you are still reading, still listening, still here, these passages are for you. They are slower, they are longer. They are the kind of writing that is meant to be read in the dark, in the quiet, when there is nowhere else to be and no reason to hurry. The case that was never closed. An extended meditation on who shot Mr. Burns. The summer of 1995 was, by certain measures, the most successful piece of participatory storytelling in the history of American television. A cartoon about a yellow family in an impossible town had just aired its 6th season finale, and in doing so had transformed itself from a television show into a national puzzle. The question, who shot Mr. Burns, was not just a cliffhanger in the conventional sense. It was an invitation. The show's producers had designed the mystery, they claimed, to be solvable from the evidence available in the episode, and they had attached a contest to it. Submit your guess, get it right, win the prize of being animated into an actual episode. Millions of people watched the season finale. Millions of people spent the summer arguing about it. The internet, which was in 1995, still young enough to have genuine communities rather than just crowds, hosted extended debates in Simpsons newsgroups. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special. The cultural machinery of the mid-90s, which was extraordinary in its enthusiasm for participatory events, turned the whole apparatus of popular attention toward a cartoon mystery. And when the answer came, in the Season 7 premiere, it was a baby. The shooter was Maggie Simpson, 1-year-old, incapable of speech, the smallest, most powerless member of the family who had the most reason to want Burns dead. She had encountered him in the parking lot after the town meeting. He had tried to take her lollipop. His own gun, which had already been shown to be missing from its holster, had ended up in her hands. The gun had gone off. Burns had been shot. The country accepted this. The show's writers stood by it. Case closed. Maggie did it. Except, as we have established, the case was never really closed. Let me tell you in more depth what the evidence actually shows and what it doesn't, because the details of the mystery are worth sitting with in the slow, unhurried way that they deserve. The gun was missing from Burns's holster before the shooting. This fact is established visually, in a brief moment during the town meeting before the shooting occurs. Burns's holster is empty. Someone had already taken the gun before the confrontation at the meeting before any of the known suspects had their encounter with Burns. This means the shooter was not someone who took the gun from Burns in the moment of the shooting. It means someone who had been in proximity to Burns earlier in the evening, who had had the opportunity to remove the weapon from the holster without Burns noticing, who had carried the gun with them through the meeting and then used it or transferred it to someone who used it. A 1-year-old baby does not pickpocket a man's holster. The official explanation that Maggie found the gun on the ground in the parking lot, that it had fallen from the holster, requires you to accept that Burns's gun fell out of his holster at some point during the meeting, lay on the floor of the town hall or the parking lot without anyone noticing it, and was then encountered by a baby who happened to be in the parking lot at the same time Burns was passing through it. This is possible. It is also a sequence of events that strains the already flexible logic of the show's universe considerably. Burns's final words before being shot were, "Oh, it's you." Not surprise. Not alarm, recognition, the specific quality of recognition that comes when you see someone you know and are not particularly threatened by the slightly flat, slightly indifferent acknowledgement of a familiar face in an unexpected place. Burns is not afraid of the person who is about to shoot him. He recognizes them, and his recognition is not accompanied by fear. Does Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? He barely recognizes Homer Simpson, who has worked for him for years. He has famously, consistently, repeatedly failed to remember the name of his own safety inspector. The running gag of Burns's inability to identify Homer, "Who is this man?" and "What was his name again?" is one of the show's most reliable comedy elements. Burns, surrounded by his employees and his town and the people he has been exploiting for decades, does not recognize most of them as individuals. They are faces, they are components, they blur together. And yet he sees someone in the parking lot and says, "Oh, it's you," with the specific intonation of someone placing a face they have seen before, someone they have a relationship to, however distant and however contentious. Someone they have been expecting to encounter, perhaps? Someone they have been dreading encountering, or someone they have business with. A 1-year-old baby would not produce this response in a man who cannot remember the name of his own safety inspector. The alternate theories about the shooter have always circled around a short list of characters who fit the evidence better than Maggie does. Marge, who had watched Burns destroy her children's school and harm her family. Smithers, who had been fired that very day and who knew Burns's movements and his weapon better than anyone. Homer himself, who has made an offhand confession to the shooting in a later season in a line that the show never pursued and never explained. The Marge theory has a particular elegance to it. It explains the "oh, it's you" with a history the show has documented. Burns was infatuated with Marge in the episode Marge Gets a Job. He had tried to use his power to manipulate her into a relationship. He knows her. He has feelings about her, complicated, inappropriate, the feelings of a man who is accustomed to getting what he wants and was, in this specific case, refused. If Marge is standing in the parking lot, Burns would say, "Oh, it's you," in exactly that register. And Marge, the Marge theory argues, would not have been identified as the shooter by Burns when he woke from his coma. Not because he didn't know it was her, because he chose not to say so. Because whatever complicated version of feeling he has for Marge, the infatuation, the obsession, the thing that caused him to try to use his power to possess her, would prevent him from sending her to prison. He would protect her. He would find another answer. He would look at the family gathered around his hospital bed, see Maggie, and make the calculation that a jury would never convict a baby. This would be the only genuinely human thing that Burns has ever done. The one moment in which his feelings for someone else overrode his self-interest, the one case in which he chose to absorb a cost, the cost of never knowing justice for what was done to him, rather than impose a cost on someone he cared about in the twisted and entirely non-reciprocal way that men like Burns care about people. Or possibly Burns woke from the coma without a clear memory of what happened. The reconstruction of events after a traumatic injury and a coma is notoriously unreliable. Human memory under normal circumstances is reconstructive rather than reproductive. We do not play back recordings. We assemble narratives from fragments, and the assembly process is influenced by suggestion, by context, by the state of mind in which the assembly takes place. Burns, waking in a hospital room with a bullet wound, surrounded by police and family members, in a state of physical and psychological shock, may have produced the narrative of Maggie as shooter, not because it was accurate, but because it was the narrative his brain assembled from the fragments available to it. The sundial, the detail that the show presents as the key clue, the thing that points toward Maggie and away from other suspects, was explicitly described by Burns himself as accidental. He did not fall in a deliberate position. He just fell. The hands landing on those letters was chance. The interpretation of those letters as initials was a choice made by investigators and audience members, not by Burns. The most heavily promoted evidence in the mystery was, by the victim's own account, meaningless. The contest that was meant to validate the solvability of the mystery, the contest that challenged America to find the shooter from the available clues, produced no winner from the legitimate entries. The prize was awarded to someone randomly, because nobody who submitted correctly had guessed Maggie, not one person in the sample. Either the clues were insufficient, or the community of fans trying to solve it was missing something fundamental, or the answer did not follow logically from what was shown. The show knows all of this. The writers knew it when they made it. They have been, across the decades since, remarkably coy about the certainty with which they stand behind the Maggie answer. The alternate ending with Smithers is fully produced and professionally animated. The season 18 Homer confession is present in the show's canonical record, unaddressed. The final image of Maggie reenacting the shooting is interpretable as either confession or imitation. Springfield closed the case. Springfield does not solve cases. Springfield closes them, which is an entirely different thing. Closing requires only a conclusion, an official story, a name attached to the crime. Solving requires truth, the truth of who shot Mr. Burns may be the most perfectly unsolvable mystery the show has produced, not because the evidence is insufficient, but because the show has deliberately preserved enough ambiguity that no interpretation can be finally ruled out. Every theory has evidence for it. Every theory has evidence against it. The mystery floats in the same way that Springfield's location floats, perpetually unresolved, perpetually present, a question that the show can always return to and never has to answer. This is, in its own way, a kind of honesty. Real crimes are frequently like this. Real cases are frequently closed rather than solved. The official story is frequently the most convenient story rather than the most accurate one. The evidence points in multiple directions, and the direction it officially points is often the direction that creates the least disruption to the existing arrangements. A baby cannot be prosecuted. This is the most important sentence in the resolution of the Burns shooting. A baby cannot be prosecuted, which means that declaring the baby the shooter ends all questions without creating any consequences. The investigation closes. The case goes away. The town moves on. And whoever actually pulled the trigger, the specific human adult who stood in the parking lot that night and made the decision to use the weapon, goes home to dinner and wakes up the next morning and goes about their life. In Springfield, this is what justice looks like. Not the adjudication of truth. The production of an outcome that allows everyone to return to their normal positions. The management of a disruption back into stability. The official story is the one that causes the least further disruption, not the one that is most accurate. And Springfield accepts this. Because Springfield always accepts this. Because the alternative, the ongoing uncertainty, the refused closure, the sustained investigation that might actually arrive somewhere is more costly than the comfortable lie. The case is closed. It was Maggie. Everyone agrees. Nobody goes to jail. Nobody has to change anything. The town resets, just like it always does. The treehouse in winter. What the horror episodes are actually afraid of. The monsters in the treehouse of horror episodes are, with remarkable consistency, not random. They are specific. They are chosen from a vocabulary of fear that is tailored to the show's particular obsessions, to the specific anxieties that Springfield is always circling without quite engaging with directly. The horror of the Treehouse episodes is not the generic horror of jump scares and gore, it is the horror of specific things that the regular episodes have been building toward all year without quite acknowledging. The aliens who come to Springfield and enslave its population who turn out, upon their removal of their human disguises, to be Kang and Kodos, who turn out upon further investigation to have been running for President of the United States. This horror is not about extraterrestrial invasion in any literal sense. It is about the horror of discovering that the people who present themselves as your choice, as your options, as the two sides of the debate you are invited to participate in, are not what they appeared to be. That the democratic process you rely on has been infiltrated by something that does not have your interests at heart. That when you pull back the masks, the faces underneath are alien to you, not human, not responsive to human concerns, operating according to principles that have nothing to do with your well-being. This is the specific horror of a specific political anxiety that the show was articulating in 1996. It was funny. It was also, for a certain kind of viewer, uncomfortably accurate in the way that the best treehouse horror is always accurate. The horror of Homer discovering that his shadow has come to life and is trying to replace him, this is the horror of the double, of the uncanny, of the version of yourself that is more capable than you are and that the people around you might prefer. It is the horror of feeling replaceable, of believing that the role you occupy in your family and your community could be filled by someone better, and that the only thing preventing that replacement is the fact that nobody has noticed yet. This is Homer's deepest anxiety, made literal and given monster shape, and released into the Halloween episode to be defeated and then put away until the next time it surfaces. The horror of the segment where Lisa creates a civilization of tiny people in her tooth and then inadvertently destroys it, this is the horror of complicity, of power, of the terrible responsibility that comes with being large in relation to something small, of being, without meaning to be, a catastrophic force in the lives of beings who have no ability to appeal to you or resist you or even fully understand what you are. This is the horror that the radiation theory implicates Burns in. At the macro scale, the horror of being the figure in whose decisions the fates of entire small lives are caught, without those lives having any meaningful recourse. Lisa is Burns in this segment, and Burns is something larger than himself, and the horror is the horror of scale. The recurring presence of death in the Treehouse episodes, the casual, comedic, deliberate deaths of major characters who reappear unharmed in the next regular episode, is the horror of impermanence made palatable through repetition. The show kills Homer and Marge and the children and brings them back because the killing is not the point. The point is the confrontation with the possibility of loss, the rehearsal of it, in a safe container, under conditions where the loss is not permanent, where the recovery is guaranteed. This is what horror is for, not to traumatize but to inoculate, to expose you to the shape of the thing you are afraid of in a controlled environment where the thing cannot actually harm you, so that when you encounter the shape of the thing in an uncontrolled environment in reality, in your actual life, you have some prior experience of it and some prior knowledge of surviving it. The Treehouse episodes are preparing Springfield's residents for losses they haven't yet experienced. And the fact that those residents keep experiencing those losses and keep having them erased by the reset, the fact that every death in the specials is undone by the next regular episode does not mean the preparation was wasted. The preparation is the experience of confronting the loss. The reset is the mercy that allows the experience to be had without the cost. You can rehearse your own death in a Treehouse of Horror episode and then wake up in the next regular episode having felt the thing without having paid for it. This is extraordinary generosity on the part of the world the show has built. This specific generosity, the provision of confrontation without cost, of rehearsal without consequence, is one of the things that makes Springfield worth returning to. Not just the warmth, not just the familiar family, but the specific mercy of a world that allows you to feel the difficult things without the difficult things becoming permanent. You can die in Springfield and come back. You can fail and reset. You can feel the horror and have it contained. This is what the Treehouse episodes provide, and this is why they matter, not just as annual novelties, but as structural features of the world, features that tell you something important about the nature of the place. A place that gives you the horror and then takes it back. A place that does not leave you with the damage. Springfield is more generous than it appears, even in its horror. On Marge and the word staying. I want to talk about staying. Specifically, I want to talk about Marge Simpson and the choice that she makes over and over across every season and every episode and every crisis and every failure and every deeply frustrating Tuesday evening when Homer has done the thing again, the choice to stay. Staying gets very little credit in the stories we tell. Our stories are organized around arrival and departure. The hero leaves home and goes on the journey. The protagonist moves away from the limiting environment of their origin and discovers who they really are in the world beyond it. The person in the wrong situation walks away from it and finds the right one. These are the narrative forms that culture has decided to honor with the word heroism, the movement outward, the departure, the refusal to remain. Staying is treated, in these same narratives, as the alternative to heroism, as what happens to the people who aren't brave enough or free enough or aware enough to leave, as the choice made by inertia or by obligation or by fear of the unknown, rather than as a positive act of will. As the passive option, Marge's staying is not passive. Watch her in the episodes where leaving is genuinely available to her. There are several. There are episodes where she meets someone who sees her clearly and values her intelligence and her creativity and her warmth in ways that Homer, due to the very limitations they describe, cannot consistently do. There are episodes where the limitations of her life, the modest finances, the difficult marriage, the demands of 3 children and a husband who requires as much management as any of them are presented not as background conditions, but as the foreground problem, the thing that the episode is explicitly examining. In those episodes, she stays. Not without pain, not without grief at the road not taken, not without the full awareness of what staying costs and what it forecloses. She stays with open eyes. She stays as someone who has considered the alternative and made a decision, not as someone who is simply unable to leave. This is the form of heroism that the show has never quite found the vocabulary to honor directly, but that it has depicted with enormous accuracy and fidelity for 36 years. The heroism of staying when staying is the harder choice, of choosing the specific person rather than the abstract better option, of deciding that the marriage you are in this marriage, with this man, with these specific frustrations and these specific rewards, is the life you are choosing rather than the life you are tolerating. Marge does not stay because she cannot imagine leaving. She stays because the specific person she married, with all his limitations and all his damage and all the ways he fails her that are both his fault and the fault of the systems that shaped him, is the specific person she loves. Not the idea of a husband. Not the version of Homer she might have hoped he would become. The actual Homer. The one who works at the nuclear plant and sleeps too much and forgets birthdays and accidentally gets the family into situations that require significant recovery and then makes the recovery happen because the recovery happening matters. To him, she loves that man, the actual one. And she stays for the actual one, which is the only kind of staying that has any real meaning. The theories we have explored tonight give Marge's staying more context and more weight than the comedy has always offered it. If Homer's damage is neurological, if the frontal lobe, the crayon, the radiation have all contributed to a person who is genuinely impaired, then Marge's choice to love and stay with him is not the choice to love a normal person who is sometimes difficult. It is the choice to love someone with a significant and permanent limitation, to understand that limitation's origin, to forgive it not because he chose it but because he didn't, and to stay present for the person inside the limitation, rather than leaving because the limitation is too difficult. This is harder. This requires more. And the show, which has always loved Marge but has not always given her the full credit she deserves, is doing exactly this, depicting exactly this specific and demanding form of love every time it shows Marge choosing to stay. She stays. The family stays together because she stays. The house is home because she decides every day to make it home. The couch is warm because she is there on it. That is not nothing. That is not the passive option, not the failure of heroism. That is the specific heroism of someone who has chosen a person rather than an ideal, who continues to choose that person in the full knowledge of what the choice costs, who builds the home that the theories say is either a purgatory or a dream or a contaminated zone and makes it, despite all of that and through all of that, the place where the family is safe. Marge Simpson is the reason Springfield is worth living in, whatever else is true about it. The floating present, on what it means that Springfield is always now. There is a philosophical puzzle that has occupied thinkers for a very long time, and it has to do with the nature of the present. The present, when you try to define it precisely, is remarkably difficult to pin down. It is not the past, it is not the things that have already happened. The accumulation of events and decisions and experiences that have settled into the permanent record of what was. And it is not the future, it is not the things that haven't happened yet. The open possibilities and approaching events that have not yet acquired the weight of actuality. The present is the boundary between these two territories, the thin line that divides what was from what will be. But a boundary has no thickness, a line has no area. The present, defined as the pure boundary between past and future, is of zero duration. It exists conceptually but cannot be measured, because any measurement requires a span of time, and any span of time includes both past and future. The moment you say now, the now you are describing has already become then. Springfield solves this problem, not through philosophy, and not through the sort of deliberate theoretical engagement that a philosophy department might bring to it. Springfield solves it the way that very old places solve all problems, through simple, absolute resistance to the usual rules. Springfield does not have a thin boundary between past and future. Springfield has an enormous, capacious, generously proportioned present, a present large enough to hold 36 years of events without those events becoming the past, a present that refuses to allow the accumulation of time to tip into the settled and done category, a present that is always now regardless of what the calendar says. This is what the floating timeline actually is, not a production convenience, not a necessary compromise between the realities of animation and the desire for story continuity. The floating timeline is Springfield insisting on the primacy of the present, insisting that now is more real, more fundamental, more important than any particular position in the sequence of time, insisting that the family that is here, right now, together on this couch, in this house, on this Tuesday evening, this family is real, and real in a way that is not diminished by the fact that they were also here last week and the week before, and 36 years of Tuesdays ago. The floating timeline is Springfield's argument that the present is not a disappearing instant but a condition, a sustained, inhabitable condition, the condition of being alive, of being conscious, of being together in this room right now with these specific people in this specific arrangement. The present is not a thin line, it is wherever you are, as long as you are actually in it rather than reaching into the past or projecting into the future. Homer is in the present when he is on the couch with his family. When he is looking at Marge and actually seeing her, when he is listening to Bart and actually hearing him, when he is watching Lisa play and actually being moved by it, when he is holding Maggie and actually feeling her weight in those moments, he is in the floating present that Springfield provides. He is not measuring the distance from 36 years ago. He is not calculating how many of these moments remain. He is here, in the room, in the present, in the specifically Springfieldian eternal, now that the show has been offering to its audience since 1989. You know what this feels like. You have been in moments like this. The moments that don't feel like points in a sequence, that feel like the sequence stops, like time pools rather than flowing, like the present becomes deep and full rather than thin and rushing. The moments where you are completely in the room, completely with the people around you, completely unable to be anywhere else because the here is too compelling to leave, even mentally, even momentarily. The floating timeline is the show's gift to its audience as well as its characters. Every time you sit down to watch The Simpsons, you are in Springfield's eternal present. You are not catching up with characters who have moved on since you last visited. You are returning to a present that has been patiently waiting for you, the same present you left last time, the same family, in the same house, in the same arrangement, as vivid and as immediate as they were the first time you encountered them. No other aspect of time operates this way. Every other relationship you have with time is sequential, accumulative, subject to the loss of what has passed. But Springfield holds the present open. It refuses the tyranny of sequence. It insists that you can always come back and find the present intact, find the family gathered, find the now still available to you. That is the theory behind all the theories. That is the deepest structure of the show. The preservation of the present against the pressure of time. The refusal to let the now become the then, the ongoing, sustained, 36-year act of keeping the door open, keeping the lights on, keeping the family on the couch in the moment just before everything is fine, just before, always just before. The credits roll before it tips into finality. The episode ends before the resolution becomes permanent. The scene cuts before the warmth becomes history. Because in Springfield, the warmth is never history. It is always happening. The resolution is always just occurring. The family is always in the moment of coming back together. That is the gift. And you have been receiving it every time you watched, every time you returned, every time you came back to the house on Evergreen Terrace and found it exactly as you left it. You will always be able to find it exactly as you left it. That is Springfield's promise. It is the promise of all the places that matter most, that they will not leave before you do, that they will be there when you need them, that the present they hold will be available whenever you choose to step back into it. The present is waiting for you in Springfield. It always will be. The last word on time in a town that has none. Here is what I want to leave you with tonight. 36 years. 788 episodes. More words of dialogue, more drawn frames, more pieces of music, more jokes, more moments of genuine emotion than almost any other piece of popular entertainment in the history of the medium. More analysis, more theory, more speculation, more care from more viewers across more decades than most of those viewers would probably have predicted when they first sat down to watch a crude, controversial, strangely endearing cartoon about a yellow family in December of 1989. What do you do with all of that? You have spent tonight with a fraction of it. 10 theories, 10 danger levels, 10 different angles on the same impossible town. You have moved through contamination and dreams and medical conspiracy and the strange grace of a place outside time. You have followed threads that led to dark places and threads that led to unexpectedly tender ones. You have thought about Homer's brain and Marge's choices, and Bart's hidden goodness, and Lisa's relentless, costly, genuine insistence on seeing clearly, and Maggie's patient, watchful, preparing silence. What you have found in all of it, what I hope you have found in all of it, is not an argument that the show is secretly about something sinister, or secretly about something more meaningful than it appears, or secretly about anything at all. The show is not a secret. It is right there, every episode of it, as clear and as present and as available as it has always been. The theories don't reveal what the show was hiding. They illuminate what the show was always showing. It was showing a family trying. It was showing love practiced badly and well and better and worse and consistently and inconsistently and stubbornly and fiercely and with the specific, irreplaceable quality of love that belongs to this specific family and no other. It was showing a town that is broken in recognizable ways, broken in the ways that real towns are broken, broken in the ways that real communities protect themselves from uncomfortable truths, broken in the ways that power and money and the organization of economic life always break the places they organize. And inside the broken town, the family trying, the love persisting, the warmth against all available evidence for why it shouldn't, persisting. That is The Simpsons. That has always been The Simpsons. And whatever theory you carry out of tonight's exploration, whatever framework you settle on for understanding what Springfield is and why it works the way it does, radiation or dream or purgatory or the sheer accumulated weight of 36 years of human creativity and care, the center of it is always the same. 5 people on a couch, 4 of them yellow, 1 of them watching, all of them home. Good night. Sleep well. The couch will be there when you wake up. It always is. Total running time. Approximately 5 to 6 hours of narration at a slow, relaxing pace suitable for 11 lab synthesis. Recommended narration speed, 0.85 to 0.9x for maximum sleepiness. All section breaks marked with are appropriate pause points for chapter markers. Epilogue Springfield at dawn. The first light comes into Springfield slowly. There is no dramatic announcement of it, no sudden shift, no clear demarcation between the night and the morning. It is the gradual, almost tentative brightening that happens in the hour before sunrise, when the dark doesn't so much end as begin to loosen. The edges of things become visible before the things themselves become clear. The outline of the power plant against the sky, the cooling towers that define Springfield's horizon, the structures that have been there longer than most of the town's residents have been alive, the outline of these things appears before their details are visible. They are shapes in the early light, Familiar shapes? Shapes you would recognize in any weather and any season because you have been seeing them your whole life. The town is quiet in this hour. Springfield is louder than it should be at almost every other hour, louder than a town its size should be. Louder in its comedy and its catastrophe and its daily accumulation of events that should not happen in a normal place, but happen constantly in this one. But in the early morning, before the people who live here have gathered themselves toward the day's requirements, there is a quiet that is real and whole and surprisingly beautiful. The river catches the first light in the way that water catches early light, with a kind of uncertainty, a not quite glowing that is different from the brightness it will have later in the day when the sun is higher and the reflections are confident. Now it just carries the light tentatively, like it isn't sure yet whether to believe in it. The fish in the river are waking up, the ones with the 3 eyes and the ones without, the mutated and the merely ordinary, the fish that the radiation theory has made significant and the fish that are just fish, swimming in the early morning in the particular slow way that fish swim when the water is cold and the light is thin. Blinky is probably there somewhere, the original 3-eyed fish, the one whose existence the show used to open the door on everything the nuclear plant theory eventually walked through. Blinky swimming in the dark water, 3-eyed, untroubled by the theories that have been built around his existence, just a fish in a river at dawn. On Evergreen Terrace, the house is still. Homer is sleeping in the particular all-in way that Homer sleeps deeply, without reserve, with the complete physical surrender of someone who has been awake and loud and crashing into things for the previous 16 hours, and who uses sleep the way other people use vacations. He snores. This is canon. The snoring has been a source of comedy and a source of marital negotiation across many episodes, and in the quiet of the early morning it is present in the house, audible from the hallway, the specific sound of a man completely offline and completely at rest. Marge is awake. She does not sleep heavily, and she often wakes before the house, before the alarm, before the day makes its first demands. She lies in the early light that comes through the curtains, and she thinks the thoughts that she only has in this hour, not the worrying thoughts, not the planning thoughts, but the underneath thoughts. The ones that don't have a shape or a purpose, but that are somehow more accurate than the shaped, purposive thoughts. The ones that are about how things actually are rather than how she is managing them. In this hour, without the management, what Marge knows is very simple. She knows that she loves this man beside her, not the idea of him, not the potential of him, not the version of him that a different set of circumstances might have produced. This specific man, with the specific shape of his breathing and the specific temperature of the space beside him in bed and the specific sounds of the house he has made his by living in it for so long, she loves this man. She knows that her children are sleeping. 3 children, each of them different, each of them carrying something she gave them and something Homer gave them and something that is entirely their own. The complicated one with the saxophone and the uncompromising soul. The mischievous one with the hidden good heart who doesn't know yet that the good heart is visible every time he thinks no one is looking, and the quiet one, the one who watches, the one who knows more than she will say and who will one day say it. She knows that this house, this imperfect, inconsistently maintained, perpetually about to need something fixed or replaced or negotiated, is home. Not perfect. Not what she would have designed if the world had offered her a blank page and unlimited materials. But hers. Theirs. The specific home of this specific family, shaped by the specific history of these specific people, and therefore irreplaceable in the way that only specific things are irreplaceable. The light gets a little brighter. Homer shifts in his sleep, makes a sound, settles back into the deeper quiet of very early morning. Upstairs, Bart is dreaming something loud enough to move his hand slightly against the bedspread. Lisa's saxophone is in its case, not playing yet, but ready the way Lisa herself is always ready, positioned toward the day even in sleep. Maggie's pacifier rises and falls with her breathing, and her eyes, in sleep, are moving slightly under their lids, tracking something in a dream that will not quite be remembered when she wakes. Outside, the town continues its tentative brightening. The plant is visible on the horizon, its cooling towers releasing their steam into the early air in the way they have been releasing steam for longer than anyone in Springfield can personally remember. The steam rises and disperses and becomes part of the morning atmosphere above the town, indistinguishable after a few hundred feet from the ordinary air. It has always done this. The town has always had this feature of its skyline, this particular exhalation at its edge, and the town has always been what it is. Contaminated and warm and broken and loving and organized around a man who should not still be alive and populated by people who have been changed by forces they cannot see and haunted by questions that the community has voted to stop. Asking and graced by a family that keeps trying, keeps staying, keeps choosing each other in the face of everything that makes that choice difficult. This is Springfield. This is what it looks like from the outside. In the early morning, before the comedy starts, it looks like everywhere. It looks like a place you might have grown up in, or driven through, or seen from a highway and forgotten, except that you haven't quite forgotten it, that it has stayed somewhere in the back of your mind as an image of a particular kind of ordinariness, a particular kind of American small-scale life, a particular kind of home. It looks like home, even from the outside, even with all the theories, even knowing about the three-eyed fish and the radiation and the coma and the managed population and the immortal billionaire at the plant. Even knowing all of that, it still looks like home, because home is not a place that is perfect. Home is a place that is specific. A place with a particular set of features and a particular cast of characters and a particular history of events, both wonderful and terrible, and a particular set of relationships between the people in it. Relationships that are complicated and imperfect and ongoing and worth having because they are yours, and because the specific people in them are yours, and because the specificity of a thing is what makes it irreplaceable. Springfield is specific. It is particular. It is the most specifically, particularly imagined fictional place in American cultural history. You cannot substitute another town for it, because there is no other town with these specific people and these specific histories and this specific warm and broken combination of features. You cannot substitute another family for them. You cannot substitute another Homer, another Marge, another Bart, another Lisa, another Maggie. They are who they are, and who they are is what 36 years have made them. And what they have made of 36 years is a family that is still there, still on the couch, still trying, still home. The light is fully morning now. The day in Springfield is beginning. And it is going to be, like all days in Springfield, both ordinary and extraordinary in the specific way that only this town manages. Something will go wrong. Something will be restored. The family will be tested and the family will find its way back. The plant will exhale its steam and the river will carry what it carries, and the billionaire at the top of the hill will look down at the town and see what he sees. And in the house on Evergreen Terrace, Marge will get up and start the coffee. And Homer will hear the coffee and begin the slow, loud, reluctant process of waking. And Bart will smell the coffee and decide it's time to get up and do something he shouldn't. And Lisa will be already up and already at her desk with a book, and Maggie will be in her high chair, watching. Tuesday in Springfield. The same Tuesday it has always been. The same Tuesday it will always be. The Tuesday that never ends because the show won't let it end, because the audience won't let it end, because the family won't let it end, because ending would mean something none of them are ready for. So it continues. The Tuesday continues. The town breathes. The family gathers. The love, imperfect and persistent and entirely real, continues. That is Springfield. That is where you've been tonight. Safe travels back,